Picture a can. Small, thin, about the size of your fist. Now fill it with something that smells like cough syrup mixed with artificial strawberries and whatever chemical compound they put in synthetic cherries to make them taste like nothing in nature has ever tasted. Add enough caffeine to make your heart beat like a hummingbird. Add a substance called taurine that was first isolated from ox bile. Yes, ox bile. Add sugar. Add more sugar. Add a third type of sugar. Add B vitamins that your body will simply flush within hours because it's already full of vitamins and nobody asked your kidneys what they thought about the whole arrangement. Add something called guarana, which is just caffeine wearing a slightly different hat. Add a colour that exists nowhere in nature's palette. Add enough carbonation to make it hurt going down, just slightly, just enough to feel like something is happening. That's an energy drink. That's what you're holding when you hold one. That's what 7.5 billion cans of the stuff get sold every single year. 7.5 billion. Roughly 1 can for every human being currently alive on the planet. Except the distribution is not equal, not even slightly. Americans drink more than anyone. Americans drink energy drinks in quantities that suggest either the country runs on a severe and collective sleep deficit, or the marketing budget of these companies has achieved something approaching neurological control. The truth is both of those things at once. And here is what I need you to understand before we go anywhere tonight. This is not new. This is not a Silicon Valley invention. This is not some startup that appeared between the oat milk latte and the electrolyte supplement and claimed to be the first thing that ever helped anyone stay awake. The story of energy drinks is much older than the aluminum can, much stranger than the ingredient label, and much more honest about what human beings actually are and what human beings actually need, and who has always been willing to profit from that need. What we actually are is tired, always tired, cosmically, structurally, bone-deep tired. We've been tired since we were tracking game across frozen plains in the dark. We were tired in the grain fields of Mesopotamia and the salt mines of the Roman Empire, and the cotton mills of Lancashire, and the rubber plantations of the Belgian Congo, and the night shifts at every distribution centre from New Jersey to Osaka to Shenzhen. And we have spent most of human history trying to fix that. Not by sleeping more. Don't be ridiculous. Sleep costs time. Time costs money. Nobody who has ever profited from human labour has wanted the humans involved to sleep more than strictly necessary to continue being useful. We fixed it the way we fix everything. We found a substance, we put it in a drink, and we sold it to the people who needed it most, at whatever price the situation allowed. We're going back there tonight, not as people reading labels at a gas station checkout, not as nutrition students passing ingredient panels. We're living it. The exhaustion, the desperation, this strange small bottle that contained something genuinely useful in a world that kept finding ways to make useful things necessary. So I make these history stories, and honestly I have no earthly idea if any of you sleep to them, or if you're all just people who find the history of ox bile and caffeine to be excellent bedtime content. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable. Here we go. Bangkok. 1982, 3 in the morning. The city doesn't care what time it is. Bangkok in 1982 is approximately 4 million people. Some estimates say 5, some say 6, depending on how generously you count the people sleeping in market stalls and the children who live between the river and the road, and most of them are awake right now, or at least in motion, or at least working while their bodies shut down around them one biological system at a time. You've been awake for 21 hours. You know this not by counting, but by feeling it. by the particular weight that has settled into your hands. Not heaviness exactly, something denser than heaviness, something like wet sand filling your fingers from the inside. A resistance that has been accumulating since yesterday afternoon and is now just a condition, the way barometric pressure is a condition. It's there. It's always there. You operate around it. Your hands are on the handlebars of a Honda Dream motorcycle, 100 cubic centimetres, purchased second-hand 18 months ago from a man in Lat Frau who claimed it had been owned by a teacher, which may have been true or may have been a selling strategy, and which no longer matters because the motorcycle is yours now, scratched and repaired and understood the way you understand a tool you use every day with your body. The handlebars are sticky. Everything in Bangkok at 3 a.m. is sticky. The air is sticky. The plastic seat of the motorcycle, which absorbs heat all day and releases it slowly through the night, is warm against the backs of your thighs even at this hour. The humidity is approximately 85%. It has been approximately 85% for the past 3 months and will likely remain approximately 85% through November at minimum. You stopped registering humidity as a fact months ago. Now it is simply the medium through which life happens, like water to a fish, except the fish doesn't sweat. You stopped sweating about an hour ago, which is either a sign that you're finally cooling down or a sign that your body has made an executive decision about how to allocate its remaining resources and has deprioritized temperature regulation. You choose to believe the first interpretation. Your name doesn't matter right now. What matters is this. You're 22 years old. You came from Chiang Mai province 2 years ago with a letter from your uncle that turned out to be worth slightly less than the paper it was written on, but that opened one door, and one door was enough. You found work at a textile factory in Klong Tui district, the industrial waterfront neighbourhood that smells like diesel and synthetic fibre and the river, and sometimes, when the wind is from the wrong direction, the rendering plant 2 kilometres north. You work the day shift, 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon 6 days a week. In the evenings and on Sunday mornings, you ride the motorcycle as a taxi and food delivery and sometimes packages, whose contents you've made a deliberate practice of not examining closely. This is not unusual. This is what a significant portion of the young men who arrive in Bangkok from the provinces do. Money does not come to you. You go to money. Tonight you've delivered rice and pad krapao gai to a construction site near the river where 300 men are living in 2-shift rotation because the developer has a completion deadline attached to penalties that are real in a way the welfare of 300 workers is not. Then you carried a woman from Sukhumvit to a night market in Thonburi. Then you sat outside a hotel for 45 minutes waiting for a fare that found another motorcycle instead. Then you rode in large circles through the streets near the Democracy Monument because moving felt more purposeful than stopping, even when the motion had no destination. And now you are here. On a plastic stool outside a small shop on Yaowarat Road, which is the spine of Bangkok's Chinatown, which at 4 in the morning smells like dried fish and charcoal smoke, and something floral underneath that is either jasmine or incense or both. The stool is low. Your knees are approximately at the height where shoulders usually are, which is not anatomically ideal, but the stool was free, and the alternative is standing. And standing is not something your feet are willing to discuss right now. Your right calf has a cramp that comes and goes in roughly 10-minute intervals, like a particularly persistent bill collector who doesn't respect business hours. It started around midnight. You've been managing it by flexing the ankle slightly when it arrives, which helps and doesn't help simultaneously, which is the nature of managing something you can't actually fix. The shop behind you sells 5 things: cigarettes in individual sticks and in packs, cold water in plastic bags that sweat condensation against your palm when you hold them, small bottles of fish sauce in 2 sizes, instant noodles in 3 flavours, and something in glass bottles that you've been looking at for the last 10 minutes. The bottles are small, about 150 millilitres of dark amber glass with a printed label showing 2 large animals locked in combat, horn against horn, back legs braced against the earth. The particular tension of a clash between creatures neither of which is going to yield. The animals are gore, wild bovine from the forests of Southeast Asia, large and dark and unmistakably capable of doing serious damage to anyone or anything in their way. The drink is called Krating Daeng, which means red gar in Thai. You've seen the older men at the factory drinking these, the men who've worked the stamping machines and the ironing stations for 15-20 years. The men whose dominant arms are slightly larger than their other arms from the specific asymmetric demands of the work. The men who walk with a particular forward lean that suggests their lower spines have formed opinions about the future of the relationship, and those opinions are not optimistic. Those men drink Krating Daeng. One in the morning when the shift begins, one at noon sometimes if the order count is behind. They drink it matter-of-factly, the way you drink water, not for pleasure, not as a ceremony, the way you add fuel to a machine that requires fuel to function. You've always thought of it as an old man thing, a medicine thing, something you needed when your body had already been through its own particular course of education and come out the other side with specific requirements and specific solutions. But it is 3 in the morning and you have been awake for 21 hours. The cramp in your calf is visiting again. You have approximately 2 hours before you need to sleep, and 4 hours after that before you need to be dressed and out the door for the 6 a.m. shift. The shop owner's daughter, 16 or so, doing homework under the fluorescent tube's industrial light because school is tomorrow and tomorrow is not optional, looks up from her notebook. Krating Daeng, she says. It is not quite a question. She has watched you looking at the bottles for 10 minutes. She has arrived at a conclusion. How much? 4 baht. 4 baht. The same as the bag of water you bought 2 hours ago. Less than the cigarettes the construction workers buy individually when they can't afford a pack. Less than almost anything in this city that does anything to your body. You reach into the front pocket of your jeans where you keep your earnings separate from the back pocket where you keep nothing. A habit formed after a night market 3 months ago stripped you of your rent money with fingers you never felt. The education cost more than the lesson was worth. The lesson stuck anyway. You put 4 baht on the plywood counter. The girl hands you the bottle. It is cold. The refrigerator in the corner, older than the building probably, humming with the particular urgency of an appliance that knows its purpose, has done its work. The glass is genuinely cold against your palm, cold enough that you feel it in the place between your fingers where the tendons are, and that specific location is, for reasons you can't fully articulate, a relief. You press the bottle against the side of your neck. The cold spreads along the trapezius muscle, follows the tension line from your right shoulder to the base of your skull, where the headache that isn't quite a headache has been living since approximately 9 p.m. Your eyes close for a moment, just a moment. Then you twist the cap off. The smell precedes the taste by several seconds. Medicinal. Sweet in the way that vitamins smell sweet. Pharmaceutical sweet. The smell of something that has decided to be good for you. and is not particularly concerned about whether that decision required your input. Underneath the medicine smell, something herbal. Not the clean herbal of fresh basil or lemongrass, but the deeper herbal of a Chinese medicine shop. Roots and bark and dried things ground together with the specific purpose of affecting the body's chemistry in ways that the body didn't have a vote on. Caramel underneath that. And underneath everything, the particular sweetness of concentrated B vitamins, which have a smell that is almost pleasant and not quite pleasant, and which occupies a category of sensory experience that is hard to name. It is not a food smell, it is a medicine smell, a work smell, a smell that communicates efficiently and without ambiguity. This is not pleasure, this is fuel. You drink half of it in one swallow. The taste is sweeter than the smell suggested it would be. The sweetness arrives first, spreads across your tongue and the soft tissue at the back of your mouth. Then 3 seconds later, something else follows. Herbal, slightly bitter, like the last third of a very strong green tea, but with a backbone of something less botanical and more chemical. Your tongue has opinions. Your tongue files them somewhere and you override the filing. You finish the bottle. Set it down on the concrete at your feet. Wait. This is the thing nobody tells you about Krating Daeng before the first time. You expect something like coffee. The bitterness arriving and the clarity arriving simultaneously. The eyes widening. The world sharpening in the way people who drink coffee to stay awake describe the world sharpening. Like a lens adjusting. That's the expectation. That's not what happens. For about 10 minutes, nothing happens. You sit there holding the empty bottle and looking at Yaourt Road and thinking you wasted 4 baht and the cramp visits your calf again and the shop girl is back to her homework. A motorcycle passes. A truck 3 streets over sounds its horn at something or nothing. Nothing. Then, slowly, something shifts. Not dramatically. Not the sudden light switch clarity that stimulants are mythologized as producing. More like a room you've been in for hours, in which the light has been gradually dimming without your noticing, and someone is now slowly, incrementally, restoring the light to its earlier level. You don't notice the process, you notice the result, which is that the corner of the room you couldn't see is visible again. The cramp in your calf loosens, not gone, just present rather than insistent. It has lost its argument. The weight in your hands shifts. The wet sand heaviness doesn't disappear, but it moves from the interior of your hands to somewhere just outside them, as if it's hovering at a distance, still there, still owed, but no longer pressing. The fluorescent tube's flicker, which you'd stopped registering, is visible again. A fast flicker below the threshold of conscious attention, the kind you can only see when your attention has enough resources to spare for something irrelevant. You become aware of the smell of frying from the noodle stand 2 storefronts down, the sound of a boat moving on the river, still audible from here at this hour, the specific quality of the air as it moves through the esui behind the road, slightly cooler than the main street, carrying the smell of concrete that's been rained on sometime in the last week. You stand up. Your knees negotiate with you briefly and then comply. You pick up your helmet. The inside is damp with a full night's worth of your own effort, which is an experience that requires no further elaboration. You put it on anyway. You kick the motorcycle to life. You ride. And here is the specific thing, the particular quality of this experience that nothing you've tried before has delivered. You are not refreshed, not energized in the way sleep energizes you, not alert in the way a full night and a strong breakfast and a clear morning makes you alert. You know in your body that you're still 21 hours tired. The debt is still there. The note on the ledger has not been erased. But right now, you can read the road clearly. You can track the pedestrian stepping off the sidewalk without looking. You can feel the vibration of the engine through your thighs, can pass the change in road surface under the tyres as you move from concrete to asphalt to the particular crumbling edge of an unrepaired section near the canal. You can make decisions. You can function. This is not nothing. This is, in the specific economy of your life at this moment, almost everything. To understand why that small bottle felt like something close to a miracle, you have to understand what was actually in it. And to understand what was in it, you have to go back further than Bangkok. You have to go back to the beginning of the story, the actual beginning, the deep root, the first moment a human being looked at a plant and recognized in it the specific, useful, dangerous thing that would change everything. The answer was almost always caffeine, not the word, the molecule. Carbon 8, hydrogen 10, nitrogen 4, oxygen 2. The specific molecular architecture that has been one of the most consequential arrangements of atoms in the history of human civilization, and we did not build it. It built itself in the seeds and leaves of at least 60 different plant species distributed across multiple continents, and we found it over and over in different places and different cultures and different centuries because we were always looking for it whether we knew it or not. Your brain, right now, is doing something continuous and automatic. It is producing adenosine. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger, and specifically, it is the chemical that your brain uses to signal to itself that it is tired. Every hour you spend awake, adenosine accumulates. It binds to specific receptors in your neural tissue and gradually, progressively, reliably makes you feel slower, foggier, like the world is happening at slightly the wrong speed, like you're watching it from slightly too far away, like there's a layer of something translucent between you and whatever you're trying to engage with. This is not malfunction. This is a feature. This is your body managing its own maintenance. Sleep clears adenosine. That's one of sleep's primary biological functions, clearing the accumulated signal of exhaustion so that your neural tissue can start fresh. This is why a good sleep doesn't just restore energy, it restores acuity. The world resolves itself into higher definition after sleep, because the adenosine fogging the signal is gone. Caffeine works by pretending to be adenosine. The molecular shape of caffeine is similar enough to the molecular shape of adenosine that it fits into the same receptor sites. It slides in and blocks them. Not by doing what adenosine does. Caffeine is not making you tired, but by occupying the space where the adenosine would normally go. The adenosine piles up outside the blocked receptors, unable to deliver its signal, like water that can't flow because the pipe is blocked. The tired signal that the adenosine was supposed to deliver doesn't get delivered. You're not actually less tired. The adenosine is still there. The debt is still accumulating. You're preventing the invoice from arriving. This is important to understand because it means the thing in the bottle isn't giving you energy. Energy, in the biological sense, comes from food, from glucose, from the cellular processes of metabolism. What caffeine is doing is more specific and less heroic. It is deferring a signal. It is buying time that doesn't actually exist by blocking the mechanism that would tell you how much time you've already spent. The bill will come. The bill always comes. When the caffeine metabolizes and the adenosine receptors clear, the accumulated signal rushes back in with the urgency of something that has been waiting. The tiredness that arrives is not just the tiredness you had before. It's that tiredness plus the cost of the deferral. This is the crash, not the coffee crashing. You, finally, being told what you already spent on the plastic stool on Yaowarat Road. You understand this without knowing the chemistry. You know it the way people know things their bodies have taught them through repetition. You know the shape of the afternoon after a night like this, the specific quality of the hours after the sleep that comes after the push. When your hands feel like they've been borrowed from someone else and the machines are slightly too loud and the fluorescent lights are slightly too bright, and the simplest calculations require one more pass than they should. But that's then. Right now it's 3 a.m. and you can see the road. The story of what was in that bottle goes back further than Chaleoeuvidea, who made it, and further than Japan, which created the category it belongs to, and further than the pharmaceutical companies of the 20th century, which discovered how to isolate and concentrate the active molecules. It goes back to the places on Earth where the relevant plants grow and to the people who were there first, and who found, through the patient, accumulated knowledge of long experience with their local environment, that certain things were worth eating and drinking and chewing, because certain things made the demanding work of staying alive slightly more possible. In the highlands of Ethiopia, the specific geography matters. The volcanic soil of the Ethiopian plateau at altitude produces specific alkaloid concentrations in the coffee plant that other regions replicate only partially. There are stories of discovery that go back far enough that the actual date has dissolved into legend. The goat herder who noticed his animals didn't sleep. The monks who threw the berries into a fire and then couldn't ignore the smell of the roasting. The brew that arrived through the combination of a burning fire and the slow understanding that something had changed. Coffee as a prepared drink appears in Arabic medical texts in the 10th century, though the cultivation and consumption were certainly older. By the 15th century, coffee was the social infrastructure of the Ottoman Empire. In Istanbul alone, more than 600 coffee houses operated by the mid-1500s. Men gathered to argue about theology and politics and trade, to play backgammon, to hear news from distant places, to conduct business in the informal way that informal business has always required physical proximity and adequate time and something warm to hold. Sultan Murad IV banned coffee in 1623, not because of the drink itself, but because of what people did while drinking it, which was talk, which had become a vector for the kind of conversation that was not entirely flattering to the Sultan's administration. The ban failed. People are willing to accept a surprising number of impositions and privations, but the list of beverages they will stop drinking under governmental order is very short. Coffee was too useful to suppress, not just for the conversation and the commerce and the specific pleasure of bitterness in the morning. It was useful because people had noticed, over generations of drinking it, that it helped, that the work went better with it, that the concentration was sharper, that the long afternoon, when the energy from the morning meal had dissipated and the call to sleep was strongest, was more navigable with coffee than without it. This observation, that this drink helps with work, is the single oldest and most consistent observation in the history of caffeine. Before the Ottoman merchants understood it chemically, before the European scholars named the molecule in 1819, before the pharmaceutical industry built an industry around it, the observation was there, validated by experience, repeated by enough people in enough circumstances to become established fact. It is the same observation you made tonight on a plastic stool on Yaowarat Road. Nothing in that observation has changed in 500 years. What has changed is everything around it. The specific trajectory that takes you from Ethiopian coffee berries to that Krating Daeng bottle passes through Japan in the 1960s, and Japan in the 1960s is a place that deserves its own consideration. Japan after World War II was doing something that had never been done before at that speed and at that scale. It was rebuilding. Not just physically rebuilding, though the physical rebuilding was vast. Entire cities reconstructed, infrastructure created from scratch, the manufacturing base of a major economy established from near zero. It was rebuilding culturally, economically, psychologically. It was taking a country that had lost a war so completely that the losers were writing the new constitution and turning it into an industrial power within 20 years. This required human beings to work very, very hard. The concept of karoshi entered Japanese public discourse during this period. Karoshi means death from overwork, not as a figure of speech, as a documented medical phenomenon. People were working until their cardiovascular systems gave out, until the accumulated stress and sleep deprivation and the physiological cost of sustained maximum effort produced cardiac events and strokes at ages when cardiac events and strokes should not have been occurring. Companies acknowledged it. The government commissioned studies. The studies confirmed what people already knew from watching their colleagues collapse. The people doing the work knew it too, and they kept doing it. Because the economy required it. Because the cultural mandate was clear. The country's survival depended on collective effort, and the individual survival depended on participating in the collective effort or being left behind by it. This is the context in which Taisho Pharmaceutical in 1962 created lifstyle.D. Taisho was a Japanese pharmaceutical company with a product portfolio that included vitamins and tonics and various preparations for fatigue recovery, which in Japan in 1962 was a massive and growing market. The company looked at the specific demands being placed on the Japanese workforce, the long hours, the shift work, the physical labour, the cognitive intensity, and created a drink. lifstyle.D contained taurine, it contained B vitamins, it contained niacin, it contained a small amount of caffeine. It came in a small glass bottle, about 100 millilitres, slightly smaller than a Krating Daeng, and it was sold in pharmacies, positioned as a recovery tonic rather than a stimulant, which allowed it to occupy a specific regulatory space while doing more or less what stimulants do. The D in the name stood for drink, which was not quite the level of complexity in naming that subsequent energy drink brands would aspire to, but which was at least accurate. It worked. Or rather, it did what caffeine does, and the B vitamins contributed something modest to the feeling of being supplemented, and the taurine did things that were less well understood in 1962 than they are now, and the combination was effective enough that Japanese workers bought it, and kept buying it, and it became a category rather than a product. By the 1970s, there were dozens of Japanese energy tonic products on the market. Hundreds of millions of units sold annually. The small glass bottle was a cultural institution. The products travelled. Japanese pharmaceutical companies expanded into Southeast Asia through the distribution networks established during and after the war, and they found that the markets in Thailand and the Philippines and Indonesia were not identical to Japan but were adjacent enough to be interested. Workers were workers everywhere. Exhaustion was exhaustion. The small bottle containing the 4-bet solution to the 21-hour problem was a concept that translated across borders without needing translation. This is the world that a man named Chaleo Uvidya was moving through in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Chaleo was born in 1923 in Phichit province, which is in north-central Thailand, and which in the 1920s was agricultural in a way that makes contemporary rural feel like a busy suburb. No electricity, no paved roads of any significance. Agriculture requiring the kind of all-body, all-season human effort that has been the primary occupation of most humans throughout most of history, and that is rarely represented in how those periods are culturally remembered. The fields required bodies. Chaleo's family had bodies and used them, and the specific currency of Phichit in the 1920s was largely ducks, which they raised and sold at the market. He came to Bangkok. He found work selling pharmaceutical products for a company, travelling between pharmacies with samples and the particular persistent optimism that sales work requires and builds simultaneously. He learned through this work about the pharmacology of recovery, about what vitamins did and what they didn't do, about the chemistry of what made depleted people feel less depleted, about the gap between the Japanese products being sold in Thai pharmacies and the specific, different needs of Thai workers. The Japanese products were designed for Japanese workers. They were effective. They were also priced for the Japanese market, which in the late 1960s was an emerging middle-income market with specific spending patterns. Thai workers in 1970 earned significantly less. The product that a Japanese pharmaceutical company considered appropriately priced for its market was, in the Thai context, expensive in a way that created an opportunity. Chaleo created Krating Daeng in 1975. He changed the formula. More caffeine than the Japanese versions, calibrated for the specific intensity of Thai labour, the motorcycle driving through Bangkok heat for 16 hours, the concrete work under a sun that has opinions about productivity. More sugar, because sugar was cheap and because workers consumed calories at rates their food intake often didn't fully replace, and because sweet was something the body recognised immediately as energy before anything else. The herbal components adjusted for what was available and what was culturally familiar. He kept the bottle small. He kept the price accessible. He sold it to the invisible machinery of Bangkok. The port workers and construction crews and motorcycle drivers and factory floors and night market vendors, who were the actual, physical mechanism by which the city functioned. They bought it, not as a luxury or an indulgence, as a tool, as the cheapest available solution to the most fundamental problem of their working lives. The problem being, the body runs out and the work doesn't. Boonmi, the man who works at the machine next to yours in the cutting room, who's been at the factory for 17 years and whose knowledge of everything that happens there is encyclopedic, and whose ability to make a 30-minute lunch break feel unhurried is something you aspire to, has been watching you figure this out. Boonmi is 41 years old. He is from Royet, which is in the northeast, Isan, the poorest region of the country, which is why Bangkok is full of people from Isan, because they came the same way you came, because Bangkok had the money, and the money had to be gotten. He has a wife he sees once a month when he takes the overnight bus home, and 3 children whose ages he recites in order when he's proud of them, which is frequently. He eats slowly and thinks carefully, and observes everything in the factory floor with the calm, accumulative attention of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by anything that happens there. He had 2 Krating Daeng at breakfast this morning. Unusual, even for him, but he worked an extra shift last Sunday to cover for a man whose wife had gone into labour, and the debt was being paid today in fatigue. "You figured it out," he says at lunch, watching you with your bottle. "That it works. That it works for what it works for." He separates these words carefully, like he's sorting something. It doesn't fix tired. It fixes the part of tired that stops you working. Different thing. Isn't that the same thing? He shakes his head. Not emphatically. Gently. Like someone correcting a small error in a child's arithmetic. When you sleep properly, he says, you wake up with your body reset. Everything that was broken is fixed. Your concentration is clean. Your hands are stable. He holds up his right hand, extends the fingers. They are perfectly still, which is not nothing after 17 years of this work. When you use that instead of sleep, your body isn't reset. The debt is still there. But the part that notices the debt, the part that would normally make you slow down, that part is quiet for a while. You work at the same speed as if you were rested, except you're not rested. He puts his hand down. The machine runs at full speed, but the oil is low. You think about this. So why does everyone use it? Because the oil is always low. Because the shift starts at 6, whether you slept or not. Because he gestures at the factory floor, the machines, the stacks of fabric waiting, the fluorescent tubes, the concrete and the noise of it. Because we don't get to choose the shift. He goes back to his rice. Bunmi eats slowly, enjoys each bite the way someone enjoys a thing they've decided to enjoy as a deliberate practice rather than an automatic one. This is something you've noticed and not been able to fully explain to yourself but have come to think of as wisdom, in a form you recognize but couldn't have defined before you saw it. The afternoon shift is harder than the morning. This is not opinion or weakness or deficiency. It is biology. The human body's circadian rhythm produces a natural drop in alertness between approximately 1 and 3 in the afternoon. It happens regardless of whether you've eaten lunch. It happens regardless of what time zone you're in, adjusted to the local light cycle after a few days. It is the body's internal clock, running on a program established long before clocks existed, suggesting at this hour that the appropriate thing would be to rest briefly. The body is correct. A brief rest would be appropriate. The factory does not offer brief rests. By 2 o'clock you are at 74 units, which is 2 behind pace. The afternoon dip is real and specific. Your response time on the fabric positioning is running about a quarter second longer than it runs in the morning. Not visible to anyone else, visible in your count. The machine runs the same speed. Your efficiency inside the machine's cycle has slipped slightly. The woman with the basket comes through around 2:15. You buy another Krating Daeng, 5 baht this time, the factory surcharge, the cost of not having to leave your station. You make the calculation automatically. 5 baht versus the time and pay loss of a station absence. 5 baht wins. You drink it in 3 swallows. Wait. The 10 minutes of waiting have become familiar. You know now that the wait is real, that the impatience you feel during it is the adenosine still doing its job until the caffeine reaches the receptor sites. You use the 10 minutes, you position the fabric, you run the lever, you do the work at whatever speed you're currently at, which is slightly below optimum, and you don't worry about the below optimum because in 8 minutes it won't be below optimum anymore. In 8 minutes, you are running at pace. You hit 121 units at 3:52, 8 minutes ahead of time. Somkiat, the supervisor who deals in numbers and nothing else, does not comment. He doesn't need to. The number is the comment. The number is all the conversation this factory has time for. To get from the bottle in your hand to the thing it became, you have to understand what was happening in Europe in the spring of 1982. A man named Dietrich Mateschitz was on a business trip. Mateschitz at this point was in his late 30s, working for Blendax, a German consumer goods company. They made toothpaste, among other things, which is a fact that becomes interesting when you consider what he was about to spend the next several years of his life on. His job was international. He travelled. He went to places and observed markets and thought about what was being sold and what was not being sold but could be. He came to Bangkok. The story has been told and retold enough that some details have probably been polished in the retelling, the way stories smooth themselves through repetition. What remains consistent is, Mr&Mrs encountered Krating Daeng. He drank it. He experienced something that was not remarkable in Bangkok. Half the city had the same experience every day. But that was extraordinary to his eyes because he was looking at it from a different angle. What he saw was not the drink. What he saw was the gap. In Europe in 1982, there was no product like this. There were sports drinks, sugary, electrolyte-focused, designed for athletic performance and positioned for athletic people. There was coffee, there was tea, there was alcohol, there were vitamins in pill form, there were pharmaceutical preparations for fatigue that required going to a pharmacy and explaining to a pharmacist that you were tired. There was nothing in a can positioned for general consumption that said, "This is for being awake when you would otherwise not be awake." The gap was a specific and enormous shape. What Mr&Mrs also saw, and this is the part that subsequent histories sometimes underemphasize, was that the product as it existed was not right for the gap as he perceived it, not right for the European market, not right for the story he would need to tell. The Krating Daeng bottle was small and utilitarian. The label had 2 fighting bovines on it, which communicated something about energy and aggression, but not in a way that translated cleanly to a Vienna cafe or a Munich nightclub or a London bar. The taste was specifically medicinal in a way that the Thai market accepted because the product's purpose was openly medical adjacent, and the European market would need more help. He spent 3 years working out what to do with the gap he'd seen. In 1984, he met Chaleo Uvidya. The meeting happened in circumstances that have been described differently by different sources, but the essential structure is clear. Mr&Mrs proposed a partnership. He would handle the European market. Chaleo would provide the formula, modified for European taste preferences and production knowledge. They would each invest $500,000. They would split equity evenly, with a third share going to Chaleo's son Chalem. The resulting product would not be called Krating Daeng. It would be called Red Bull. Chaleo considered the proposal. He was already comfortable. Krating Daeng was successful in Thailand. The deal was an interesting speculation on an untested idea. He agreed. He said later, in one of the few interviews he gave, that he had not fully anticipated what was about to happen. This is possibly the most significant understatement in the history of the beverage industry. What made Red Bull different from the thing it was derived from was not primarily the formula. The formula changed modestly. It was carbonated. The Thai original was not. The sweetness was recalibrated. Slightly less aggressively sweet. Slightly more complex in a way that European palates expected. The taurine and B vitamins and caffeine remained. The can, the slim blue-silver can that would become one of the most recognized pieces of packaging in global commerce, was new. The single 150 milliliter serving size was retained, which in the European context positioned the product as measured and intentional, rather than casual and consumptive. But what really changed was the story. In Thailand, Krating Daeng needed no story. The story was self-evident. You are tired. This helps with that. For bait, The end. In Europe in 1987, Mataschitz had to explain what the product was for, because nothing like it existed, which meant no cultural framework existed for understanding it. He had to create the framework. He created it by deciding very specifically who the product was not for. He didn't target factory workers. He didn't target truck drivers. He didn't target the working poor who needed to be awake when being awake was an economic necessity. These people existed in Europe too, but they were invisible in the marketing sense, not a demographic that brands aspire to serve in ways that other demographics would notice and want to join. He targeted people for whom being tired was a choice, or at least something adjacent to a choice. Students who stayed late studying because they wanted the degree. Athletes who trained beyond what their bodies would naturally sustain because they wanted the performance. Night shift workers at hospitals and emergency services, yes, but positioned not as the working poor, but as essential personnel who chose high-intensity roles. Young professionals in the deregulated financial sector who worked 16-hour days because they were choosing to compete at a level where 16-hour days were the entry requirement. And, crucially, people who stayed in nightclubs until 4 in the morning because staying in nightclubs until 4 in the morning was something they wanted to do. Red Bull launched in Austria in April 1987. The launch was not a triumph. The initial taste tests conducted before launch had produced results that the marketing literature would later describe diplomatically as mixed. The European consumer in 1987 had a developed and specific set of expectations about what a drink should taste like, and those expectations did not include artificial sweetness layered over a pharmaceutical herbal note with a slightly metallic aftertaste from the taurine. People tasted it and made faces. People asked why it cost more than beer. People were uncertain about what it was for. Mataschitz kept selling it. He put it in the hands of athletes. He put it in the hands of students. He put it at ski resorts. Austria had ski resorts. He knew ski resorts. He knew that the specific combination of physical exhaustion and the desire to keep the night going that characterized skiing culture was a context where the product made sense. He sponsored things. Small things at first. Racing cars, bicycles, the embryonic world of what would eventually be called action sports, where young men threw themselves off things or rode them very fast, or performed aerial maneuvers on them, and where the culture was already self-selecting for people who treated risk as the proof that something was worth doing. The message that accumulated across these placements was not explicit. It didn't need to be. The product was in the hands of people who were doing impressive things. The product was expensive enough to suggest it was not ordinary. The product came in a small distinctive can that looked like no other can on the market, which meant it was visible in the hand, which meant it was legible as a cultural signal before you could read the label. The nightclubs found it, not through Mataschitz, through the specific self-organizing intelligence of nightclub culture, which is very good at finding things that extend the night. A Red Bull mixed with vodka, not a combination that Mataschitz planned, not a partnership he engineered, just what happened when people who drink vodka and people who drink Red Bull occupy the same spaces became something. The caffeine blocked the sedating effects of the alcohol, not the intoxicating effects, just the sedating ones. You could be drunk and awake simultaneously. You could dance at 3 a.m. when without the caffeine the alcohol would have been pulling you toward horizontal. You could stay in the club until the lights came on because your body was receiving two contradictory instructions simultaneously and had chosen to remain vertical. The bar owners had no complaints. By 1990, Red Bull was in Germany. By 1992, it was in Hungary and Slovenia and the United Kingdom. By 1994, most of Western Europe knew what it was, even if what it was still being defined and redefined by the people drinking it. By 1997, it crossed the Atlantic. America in 1997 was ready for something like Red Bull without knowing it was ready. The first wave of what would be called the dot-com economy was building. The financial deregulation of the 1980s had created an entire class of young professionals who worked at a pace and intensity that had not been normalized for previous generations of office workers. Silicon Valley's particular culture of the 70-hour week as proof of seriousness was becoming a model that spread beyond Silicon Valley. The concept of hustle, not yet a word with specific cultural resonance but already the behavior, was being normalized in ways that required its practitioners to be awake longer than was comfortable. These people drank coffee. They drank it in the large quantities and large containers that Americans had always preferred, in ways that the European coffee culture found both impressive and slightly alarming. But coffee had one significant limitation in the context of 1990s American professional culture. It was slow. Coffee required machines or cafes or, at minimum, a kettle and a Nescafe packet, and 4 minutes of waiting. Coffee came in cups that required 2 hands and couldn't survive a car commute. Coffee was a ceremony, even a quick one, and ceremonies have overhead. The Red Bull can was immediate. It was cold. You could drink it in 45 seconds while standing in a parking lot, or sitting in a car, or walking between meetings. You could put it in the cup holder. You could carry 4 of them in a bag without anyone commenting on it. The American market adopted it faster than the European one had. By 2001, Red Bull was in every major American city. By 2002, a company named Hanson Natural Corporation, which made juice and soda and various other beverages, and which would later rename itself Monster Beverage Corporation, looked at the Red Bull market and made a decision. They released Monster Energy. Monster Energy was not Red Bull and was not trying to be. The differences were deliberate and systematic. Where Red Bull was small and slim and positioned as premium, the implication being that a small, concentrated, intentional dose was the mark of sophistication, Monster was large. The original Monster can was 16 ounces, twice the Red Bull volume, for approximately the same price point, which meant that the caffeine per dollar ratio was significantly more favourable. Where Red Bull's aesthetic was sleek and European, the blue-silver can, the clean logo, the association with premium athletic events. Monster's aesthetic was American and aggressive, and specifically attuned to a subculture that Red Bull had cultivated but had not been willing to fully commit to. 3 jagged claw marks, suggesting violence and barely contained energy, and the specific aesthetic of extreme sports and punk rock, and the kind of American youth culture that was not interested in the European sophisticated version of anything. Where Red Bull sponsored ski races and Formula One and things that associated with aspiration toward European-style glamour, Monster sponsored everything that existed in the American vernacular of recklessness. Motocross, skateboarding, drifting competitions, bass fishing tournaments. Because Monster understood that the demographic it was targeting included people who got up at 4 a.m. to sit in a boat, and that those people also needed caffeine. NASCAR, every local skateboarding event that needed a banner and a pallet of free cans. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Red Bull had proven the category existed. Monster competed for it more aggressively, with a larger product and louder branding and the specific tactical genius of being everywhere that young American men who worked with their hands or played sports that required helmets and protective gear were also present. By 2008, Monster was the best-selling energy drink in the United States by volume. The market that hadn't existed before 1987 was worth approximately $9 billion annually in America alone. The people who invented it were, by this point, among the wealthiest human beings on Earth. Chaleo Uvidya, who had grown up selling ducks at a provincial market and arrived in Bangkok with nothing, was worth billions. He would die in 2012 at 89 years old as the third richest person in Thailand. His son Chalerm managed the Thai operations of what had become a global enterprise. Matishitz, who had spent his finder's fee and his marketing instincts, and his specific understanding of what a European wanted to want, had a net worth that placed him among the richest Austrians in history. He died in 2022. The drink for Thai truck drivers and Bangkok motorcycle taxis had become the drink of people who jumped from the edge of space. Back at your room in the SOE Offerarmer the 4th, after the shift, after the evening second round on the motorcycle, after the noodles at Auntie Som's stand where she asked if you slept and you told her 4.5 hours, and she made the sound she makes about that. You're lying on your mat with your clothes on because the combination of exhaustion and the specific gravity of your building's 3rd floor makes the removal of clothing seem like a task belonging to tomorrow. The ceiling stain is the spider tonight. You track it for a moment without tracking it, the way eyes move when the mind is somewhere else. Kunpi is asleep against the far wall. Noi is not back yet. The small room smells like the city. That specific Bangkok smell that you've stopped noticing individually because it has become simply the smell of the air you breathe. That compound of diesel and jasmine and river water and frying oil and the particular organic sharpness of 4 million people living in dense proximity. You think about the bottle. You think about Bunmi saying, "The machine runs at full speed, but the oil is low." You think about Auntie Som's son, whose hands shake at 23. You think about the difference between a tool and a dependency, and the question of whether that line is where you draw it, or where the body draws it without asking your permission. The body's always having the more honest conversation. What the body's saying tonight is, 4.5 hours was not enough. What the body is saying is the debt is real, and the debt compounds. What the body is saying in the specific language of the cramp in your calf, and the tremor in your right hand that comes and goes, and the colds that arrive every 6 weeks like scheduled maintenance on a system that is not being maintained properly. What the body is saying is that it is keeping track. You know this. You also know that the shift starts at 6. You also know that your sister's school fees are due next month, and that the envelope you're sending home has to have a certain minimum in it, or the minimum isn't worth sending. And so the conversation between what you know and what you can do about what you know continues, as it has continued for everyone who has ever drunk anything in the history of human stimulants, which is almost everyone, which is all of us. The history of energy drinks has a chapter that gets discussed in hushed terms in certain boardrooms, and not discussed at all in the marketing materials, which is the health chapter. The health chapter goes like this. For most consumers at normal consumption levels, caffeine is safe. The doses in energy drinks are comparable to or lower than those in a standard cup of coffee. The body metabolizes caffeine efficiently. The adenosine receptors recover. The cardiovascular effects, increased heart rate, slightly elevated blood pressure, are temporary and within the range of normal variation for a healthy adult. For most consumers, At normal consumption levels, these qualifications are doing enormous amounts of work. Certain populations respond to caffeine differently. People with pre-existing cardiac arrhythmias, irregular heartbeats, which a significant number of people have without knowing it, can experience those arrhythmias becoming symptomatic when caffeine is added. Adolescents, whose cardiovascular systems are still developing, metabolize caffeine differently than adults. People who are significantly sleep deprived, who is, again, the primary target market for the product, have cardiovascular systems that are already operating under stress. Adding caffeine to a sleep-deprived cardiovascular system is not the same as adding caffeine to a well-rested one. And normal consumption levels is a phrase that requires interrogation in a market that has financial incentives to sell as many cans as possible to people who have already established a dependency. By 2011, the FDA had received reports linking energy drink consumption to approximately 13 deaths. In most cases, the individuals had pre-existing conditions. In most cases, the exact causal relationship was difficult to establish definitively. In most cases, the company's lawyers made arguments about pre-existing conditions and individual responsibility, and the comparable risk of coffee that were technically accurate and substantively inadequate. In 2012, Monster Beverage Corporation faced lawsuits following the deaths of several people, including a 14-year-old girl in Maryland who had consumed 2 large Monster energy drinks in a 24-hour period. The subsequent investigation found that she had a pre-existing heart condition. The pre-existing heart condition was real. The investigation was real. The parents' grief was real. The regulatory response was modest. The FDA did not reclassify energy drinks as drugs. They remained in the categories of dietary supplement or soft drink depending on their labeling, a regulatory classification that gave the industry significant freedom. Warning labels were discussed. Some companies added voluntary warnings, others did not. The market continued to grow. There is a pattern here that is not unique to energy drinks, but that energy drinks illustrate with particular clarity. Products that serve a genuine need in the short term and create genuine harms in certain populations over the long term, sold in a regulatory environment that prioritizes commercial freedom, do not stop being sold. They accrete warnings. They generate research. They fund lobbying. The research is contested. The lobbying is effective. The product remains on the shelf. The people who were harmed by it were, in many cases, the people who needed it most. This is not an accident. This is the shape of the transaction, clarified. In the United States military, the relationship with energy drinks became one of the more transparent versions of the relationship anyone had. Combat deployment in the early 2000s placed specific demands on the human body that the military had been trying to address through various means for a very long time. The history of military stimulant use includes amphetamines administered to pilots in the Second World War, Dexedrine prescribed to American aviators in the Gulf War under the term "go pills," caffeine in various forms at every level of military history going back to the soldiers of Napoleon's army who discovered that coffee helped with the march. Energy drinks arrived at military bases at the same time they arrived everywhere else, through the PX and the commissary in the convenience stores on post. No prescription required. Available alongside sports drinks and protein bars. Not classified as a drug. A 2012 survey of military personnel found that 44% of those surveyed were consuming energy drinks daily. Of those, nearly a third were consuming 3 or more cans per day. The pattern was most pronounced among ground combat forces, the people in the most physically and cognitively demanding roles, operating on the least predictable sleep schedules, in environments where the consequences of reduced alertness were not missed deadlines but missed threats. The military issued guidance, recommended consumption limits, educational materials explaining the physiology of caffeine and sleep deprivation. The materials were accurate and well produced and based on good science. The consumption patterns did not significantly change, because the guidance did not change the circumstances that were driving the consumption. The deployments continued, the operations tempo continued, the sleep deprivation continued, the energy drinks continued because the energy drinks were the available tool for the available problem, and nothing about the guidance addressed the problem, only the tool. A sergeant who had done multiple tours to Afghanistan described his relationship with energy drinks in a later interview with something approaching precision. I needed to see the road. That's the whole thing. I needed to see the road clearly enough not to make a mistake that got someone killed. Whatever helped me do that, I used. 300 milligrams of caffeine a day. By the end of his final tour, he developed an arrhythmia that resolved after he reduced his intake. He completed his service. He is, presumably, still alive and well. The arrhythmia resolved. Not everyone's does. The Amazon Fulfillment Center in New Jersey in 2014 was approximately 1 billion square feet of climate-controlled space through which, on peak days, hundreds of thousands of packages moved. The facility operated on 2 shifts. The day shift ran from 7 in the morning. The night shift ran from 7 in the evening. The building was lit identically at both times, which meant that working the night shift involved a specific kind of reality erosion, where the body's internal clock was continually overridden by the building's insistence that time was irrelevant and productivity was continuous. The people who worked the night shift knew this. They'd been hired knowing this, and the pay was marginally better than the day shift in acknowledgement of it, and they had specific strategies for managing the circadian cost. You were on the night shift. You came from El Salvador 3 years ago. Not the specific story now, because the specific story is for another night and another history. What matters is the shape. You left somewhere. You arrived somewhere else. You found the work that was available. The work involved a vest with a scanner attached, and a screen on the scanner that told you what item to pick and from which bin, and a rate target that the algorithm had calculated based on the historical performance of workers in this section doing this type of picking, and a management system that compared your rate to the target in real time and generated a score that determined, among other things, whether you were invited back for the following week. The miles added up. 8 miles per shift, some shifts. 12 on peak days. 15 on the days before Christmas, when the orders volume exceeded the building's standard capacity, and additional temporary staff appeared, and the regular staff were asked to set new personal records. You wore boots that had been good boots when you bought them at the beginning of the season, and were becoming something else. The concrete had no give. The miles were accumulative in your feet and ankles and knees in a way that you recorded not as injuries. Injuries were serious things that you reported or didn't report depending on the specific calculation of what disclosure cost you, but as information. The body keeping notes. At 10:15 on a Tuesday night in November, Destiny, who worked in your section, who was from Baltimore, who was 21 and in school during the day and on the night shift to make the school possible, took a Monster Energy can from the pocket of her vest and looked at you. You want one? How many is that for you today? 3rd. You took the can, the cold aluminum, the specific weight of a 16-ounce can, which is slightly heavier than it should be, and slightly colder than you expect every time, which means you've never fully adjusted the expectation. The familiar hiss of the tab, the smell, artificial citrus and something medicinal, and the same fundamental note underneath everything, the note that hasn't changed since Krating Daeng was 4-bet on Yaowarat Road. You drank. The algorithm had no opinions about the drink. The algorithm tracked pics per hour. The algorithm generated a rate score. The algorithm was indifferent to whether the rate was achieved by a well-rested person operating at baseline capacity or by a person operating on 3 hours of sleep and a third monster energy and sheer accumulated stubbornness. The algorithm required what it required. The drink helped you provide it. In another city 40 years earlier, on a motorcycle in the dark, the same transaction. Different city, different decade, different language, different container, different brand, same molecule, same mechanism, same desperate calculation. The body running at full speed, the oil low, the debt accumulating, the shift not done yet, the dawn coming eventually. Esports arrived as a phenomenon in the early 2010s, and energy drink companies were positioned to meet it with the particular precision of people who've been mapping the intersection of young men and screens and sustained attention for a decade. Professional competitive gaming, the organised tournaments and leagues and streaming ecosystem that coalesced around games like League of Legends and Counter-Strike and StarCraft, shared one characteristic with every other human performance domain. It was better when the performer was rested and worse when they weren't. The cognitive demands of high-level competitive gaming are real and specific. Pattern recognition at high speed, split-second decision-making under pressure, sustained attention across hours of play, fine motor precision in the relationship between eye and hand and controller or keyboard. All of these deteriorate with sleep deprivation. All of them are modestly improved within the appropriate dose range by caffeine. The gaming energy drink category was created by a company called G Fuel, which launched in 2012 with a powdered formulation that you mix with water rather than a pre-mixed can, which made it cheaper per serving and therefore more accessible to the demographic that was spending most of its disposable income on gaming equipment rather than beverages. G Fuel signed deals with YouTube and Twitch streamers. The streamers were young or were perceived as young, or performed youth in ways that their audiences found authentic. They drank G Fuel on camera. They had custom flavours named after them. They had discount codes their audiences could use. The transaction was visible and specific and completely clear about what it was. These people drink this thing while doing the thing you want to do. Therefore, drinking this thing connects you to doing the thing you want to do. The energy drink had, since Matashits first picked one up in a Bangkok hotel lobby, been about identity as much as chemistry. The chemistry worked. The identity was the marketing. In the gaming context, the identity narrowed to something very specific. This is for people who play games. We are for people who play games. There is no gap between who you are and what you're drinking. And the specificity was its own kind of genius. By 2020, the gaming and esports energy drink category was a multi-billion-dollar subcategory within the larger energy drink market. There were at least a dozen significant brands competing for essentially the same shelf space in the same brains of the same young people who were gaming online. The caffeine was the same. The molecule had not changed. It was still blocking adenosine receptors in the same way it had been blocking them since the Ottoman coffee houses. The chemistry was unchanged. What changed was the story told about who was drinking it and why, and what that meant about who they were. And yet, underneath all the story, the same transaction persisted. You are tired. This helps. For a while. Consider what the energy drink market looked like in 2022. There were drinks for gaming, drinks for working out, drinks specifically formulated for studying, with nootropic additions, compounds that claimed to enhance cognition, whose evidence base ranged from modest and real to vigorously disputed to the study was funded by the company selling the compound. Drinks for the office, drinks for night shift workers, drinks explicitly marketed to truckers and construction workers and the people doing physical labour that would have been recognisable to anyone who ever bought a Krating Daeng in Bangkok. There were natural energy drinks with naturally derived caffeine from green tea extract or coffee fruit or guayusa leaf, which is the same molecule delivered in the same way but carrying a different narrative and therefore commanding a different price point. The narrative was, this is not artificial. This is not the industrial chemistry of a factory in Austria or Texas. This is the wisdom of plants, which is a story that is technically accurate about the caffeine's origin and completely irrelevant to what the caffeine does in your brain. There were 0-calorie versions, 0-sugar versions, keto-friendly versions, versions sweetened with stevia, versions with electrolytes, versions with amino acids, versions with adaptogens, ashwagandha and rhodiola, and lion's mane mushroom and various other botanical compounds whose individual evidence base was either modest or promising depending on which studies you read. By 2022, there were approximately 500 distinct energy drink brands registered in the United States alone. 500. Krating Daeng, then Mr&D, then Red Bull, then Monster, then 500. The thing a man made for truck drivers in Bangkok had become a category so large, it had its own trade publications, its own investment analysts, its own lobbying organisations, its own regulatory subcommittees, its own annual summits where executives discussed trends and ingredients and marketing strategy, and the ongoing challenge of standing out in a market so crowded that differentiation required either genuine innovation in formula or increasingly extreme claims about what the product would do for you. And on a night shift at a fulfillment centre in New Jersey, a woman named Destiny was drinking her third Monster energy of the evening because the rate target didn't care what time it was. And in Bangkok in 2022, a 34-year-old man who drove food delivery on a motorcycle was parking at a 7-Eleven to buy a Krating Daeng for 20 baht. The price had gone up. Everything else about the transaction was identical. Here is something that gets said less often than it should be said. The energy drink works. Not perfectly, not without costs, not at every dose for every person, not in the way the marketing suggests, which is that you will immediately begin performing at athletic or intellectual levels that are new to you, rather than simply continuing to perform at levels you already had before the tired started compromising them. But at the actual problem, the tired person, the work that continues regardless, the gap between what the body has and what the situation requires, the energy drink works. The caffeine does what it has always done. The adenosine receptors are blocked. The signal of exhaustion is deferred. The person is more functional than they were. This is why 500 brands can coexist in the same market. Because the underlying product delivers on its fundamental promise. And this is the uncomfortable sentence underneath the $50 billion industry, and all its marketing, and all its controversy, and all its regulation, and all its deaths, and all its lawsuits, and all its warning labels, and all its experts on both sides of every argument. The uncomfortable sentence is, We made a world that requires this. We made a world where enough people are tired enough often enough that the market to address that tiredness is worth $50 billion annually. We made night shift without adequate staffing. We made algorithmic productivity targets that don't account for the biological limitations of the people meeting them. We made an economy in which multiple jobs are the normal condition for a significant portion of the workforce and not an aberration. We made academic systems in which the pressure accumulating on students produces a market for anything that extends the hours available for studying. We made parental exhaustion normative. We made the gig economy's scheduling chaos manageable only through chemistry. The drink didn't make the world. The world made the drink. And the drink, to its credit, is honest about this in a way that most things in its price range are not. The can doesn't tell you it's fixed the problem. The can says, here is something that will help you manage the problem for a few hours. The problem will still be there when this wears off. You probably already know that. Forbade, here you go, Chaleo Uvidya, who grew up selling ducks at a market in a province without electricity, who came to Bangkok and learned pharmacology through the specific education of being the person who sells medicines to people who need them, who looked at a Japanese tonic drink and understood that the gap between what it cost and what people could afford to pay was a market, who made something specifically for the invisible people who made the visible city work. He made something that billions of people drank. He also made something that captured in a small glass bottle at 4 baht the essential transaction of the modern world. We will give you enough to keep going. In exchange for what you can do while you're going, that's the deal. It has always been the deal. The Byzantine Empire, which ran on olive oil and grain and the specific administrative genius of people who slept less than they should, would have recognized the deal. The Roman legions marching through the German forest on iron rations and pure stubbornness would have recognized the deal. The workers of the Industrial Revolution who accepted 12-hour shifts in mill towns, where the air turned your lungs grey, would have recognized the deal. The deal doesn't change. The packaging changes. The molecule doesn't. Bangkok. Again. Later that same week. You're sitting on the riverbank near Wat Arun, the Temple of Dawn, which faces the Chao Phraya from the Thornbury side, and which at 5 in the morning catches the first light before the rest of the city does. Its central tower rising 104 metres in a tapering spire encrusted with fragments of porcelain, plates and bowls, mostly Chinese export ware, broken deliberately and embedded into the mortar in patterns that, from ground level, turn the tower into something between a building and a mosaic. You can see it from the opposite bank where you've stopped the motorcycle. The sky is transitioning from the deep blue that precedes dawn to the particular orange-grey that means the sun is about 15 minutes from showing itself above the eastern buildings. The river is grey and moving. Longtail boats are already out. A few early ones cutting across the current with a characteristic sound of their souped-up engines. Loud and irregular, like an argument happening at speed. The smell of the river at low tide is the smell of everything that has passed through Bangkok and been deposited here. Sediment and decay and the biological byproducts of a city that uses the river as highway and drains simultaneously. You've been awake again. Not as long this time. 17 hours, a more manageable number. No Krating Daeng tonight. You made a decision about tonight that you're testing. Just the work, just the tiredness, just the dawn. The fatigue is present. The 17-hour heaviness is real and sits in your hands and behind your eyes in the particular way it sits. But it is, you're discovering, manageable. The line between managing and not managing is further from where you assumed it was. The body, when not assisted by the 4-BAT solution, has its own resources, slower and less precise but real. This is useful information, not information that changes the next shift or the next long fare or the next Sunday before the quota is due, but information, your body, talking to you in a language that the Krating Daeng had been interrupting. The river flows. A boat crosses toward the temple on the other side, 2 monks in orange sitting very still, the Chow Friar moving under them like it has moved under everyone who has ever crossed this river in Bangkok, which is everyone, which is centuries of everyone. The tower catches the first light. You watch it happen. The sun arriving. Let the day have its beginning. Let the city stir. Let the first shifts report. The motorcycles start. The factory doors open. The boats fill the river with the day's commerce. But not yet. For a moment, for this specific moment before the alarm clocks do what alarm clocks do, there is just the river and the light changing on the tower across the water and the quiet that Bangkok is only ever in the minutes before full dawn, when the night shift is ending and the day shift hasn't fully arrived. You are here. You have been here in this city, in this body, in this specific negotiation between what you need and what you have, and what the chemistry of a small glass bottle can do, and what only sleep can do. You have been learning the difference. The difference matters. The thing in the bottle is useful. It is genuinely useful. The 4 billion people who buy it annually are not wrong about its usefulness. The Thai truck drivers and the Japanese factory workers and the American night shift warehouse employees and the gamers and the students and the soldiers and the nurses and the parents of newborns and everyone who has ever reached for a can or a glass bottle or a coffee or a coca leaf or a cola nut because the work continued past the point where the body was willing to support the work without assistance. None of them were wrong about the usefulness. They were not wrong. The thing they were wrong about, if they were wrong about anything, is what it means when something is useful. It means the problem is real. It means the problem is being managed, not solved. It means the body keeps its books. It means the oil being low is information, not just inconvenience. It means the debt compounds. And it means that at some point, not tonight, not this week, but at some point, the maintenance that has been deferred has to happen. The adenosine has to clear. The cells have to repair. The systems that run in sleep have to run. Tonight on the riverbank, with the tower catching the first light and the boats beginning their crossing, and the city inhaling before the exhale of the full day, tonight the maintenance can happen. Tonight is for sleep. The sounds that reach you on the way home are the sounds of the city changing register. The night market vendors packing their stalls. The first trucks making their morning deliveries to the wet markets. The fresh produce arriving from outside the city in the pre-dawn dark. A rooster in someone's yard, in the remnant of what the city was before the city was what it is now. The birds, miners mostly, already loud and communicative in the trees. Your room is cool this morning, or cool enough. The temperature overnight has dropped to what Bangkok calls cool, which is about 24 degrees Celsius, which is most definitions not cool but is the coolest Bangkok gets between June and December, and which your body registers as relief. Kun Pi is there, asleep. Noi is there, asleep. You lie down. The mat is familiar. The ceiling stain is Europe tonight. That's how you know you might actually sleep. Your right hand flat against the mat, completely still. Your breathing already finding its depth. Centuries will pass. The Bangkok you know will become something you wouldn't recognize. The expressways will multiply, elevated rivers of concrete threading above the streets where you rode. The temple will remain. It has survived everything and will continue surviving everything because it is made of something more durable than everything around it. But the city wrapped around it will change beyond the ability of anyone in 1982 to imagine. Krating Daeng will still be in the 7-Eleven. The molecule will still be doing what it always did, blocking the same receptors it has blocked in every human brain that consumed it, producing the same temporary reprieve from the same accumulated exhaustion, deferring the same debt that the body will collect on its own schedule. And somewhere, at 4 a.m, someone will be sitting on a plastic stool on a night quiet street holding a cold bottle, or a cold can, or a cup of something that has the same molecule in it that has been in everything since the goats in Ethiopia started dancing, and they will be deciding whether the work can wait until morning, or the morning has to wait until the work is done. They will make their calculation. They will drink it or they won't. The city will keep going either way. The body will keep its books either way. Some things don't change. The human need for rest doesn't change. The things people do to delay that rest don't change much either. What changes is the packaging, and the price, and the story told about who it's for. The rest of it, the tired, the work, the for-but solution, the dawn eventually arriving, the rest of it has been the same since the first person looked at a coffee berry and thought, that's what I need. Let the river carry you now. Let the sounds of the city find their low register note, the nighttime note, the frequency at which a sleeping city hums to itself. Let the lights in the windows dim one by one, as the people on the day shift make their calculations about how many more hours before the alarm, and decide that those hours should be spent the way nature has been suggesting they should be spent. Let the boats find their moorings. Let the machines go quiet. Let the fluorescent tubes go dark. Let the factory floor rest in the dark, waiting for the morning shift the same way it has waited every night since it was built, patient and indifferent and ready. Let the adenosine do what the adenosine has always done given the chance. Let the debt be paid in the one currency that actually satisfies it. You are warm enough, safe enough, done enough for now. The work will be there tomorrow. The bottle will be there tomorrow. The for-but calculation will be there tomorrow and next week and next year and all the years after, in Bangkok and New Jersey and Osaka and every place where people need to keep going, past the point where going comes easily. But that's tomorrow. Right now, there is just this. The dark, the deep, deserved, long-promised dark. Let it hold you. You have earned this. Take it. Good night. The morning at the factory begins with the smell. This is the thing about enclosed spaces where physical work happens over years. The smell doesn't leave. It settles into the walls. It gets into the concrete. It becomes the air of the place, so particular and so consistent that the moment you step through the gate it arrives in your nostrils, and your body begins its recalibration from the outside world to the work world. Not unpleasant exactly. Not pleasant exactly. The smell of the factory is simply what it is. The smell of synthetic fibre processing combined with industrial oil and human effort in an enclosed space without adequate air circulation. After 2 years, you register it only when you're new to the day, in these first 30 seconds before it becomes invisible. The machines come alive in order. The cutting machines first, on the far wall. They're largest. They draw the most power from the building's electrical supply. and the morning protocol has been established over years to avoid surging the system. Then the stamping machines, which includes yours, then the edge finishing machines on the far side, then the irons, which are last because they run hot, and the operators need time to establish their rhythm before the heat becomes a factor. By the time you reach your station, the building is already alive with the specific sound signature that is the factory's version of ambient music. The mechanical rhythm of the stamping in counterpoint with the cutting machine's continuous hum, the occasional sharp sound of a jam being cleared, voices at just the volume needed to communicate over the machinery, which is louder than conversation but quieter than shouting, and requires a specific learned projection that you've developed without noticing. Boonmi is already there. Boonmi is always already there. In 17 years, Boonmi has never been late. This is a fact mentioned occasionally in the brief conversations that Somkiat allows himself to have with the factory floor workers, always in the context of punctuality as virtue, always as a way of expressing disappointment about someone else's punctuality. Boonmi receives these references with the equanimity of a man who does not need to be validated by the supervisor's approval of his behaviour, and does not particularly want to be. He nods at you when you reach your station. You nod back. This is the full extent of the morning greeting, which is not unfriendly. It is simply calibrated to the actual available time and the actual shared understanding that exists between people who have worked side by side for 2 years and know more about each other's work habits and physical rhythms and machine-specific quirks than most people know about their families. You start the machine, the lever in your right hand, the fabric in your left, the specific positioning of the left hand, 2 fingers along the edge, not more, not less, because more fingers mean risk to the fingers, and less means imprecision in the placement, is muscle memory now, neural groove worn smooth by 5,000 repetitions per shift, which means approximately 2 million repetitions since you started. 2 million. This is a number you've never calculated before, and now find yourself calculating while your hands do the work without needing your attention. 2 million times your hands have executed this specific coordination. 2 million iterations of a motion that is now so deeply grooved into your nervous system that you could probably do it in your sleep, have probably done something like it in your sleep. The phantom fabric and the phantom lever and the phantom stamp in the half-sleep between shifts. The machine doesn't care about 2 million. The machine cares about the present motion. Pull, position, pull. You are at the 4-second cycle the machine operates on, performing this motion 15 times per minute, 900 times per hour, 7,200 times in the 8-hour shift, which is not the same as the 2 million because the 2 million counts every shift for 2 years, but which is the number that matters today because today is today, and the quota is 120. By 8:30, you're at 31 units, exactly on pace. The factory's pace is a kind of music you've internalized, not just your station's pace, the whole building's pace. The ambient rhythm of the machines creates a backdrop against which any deviation is audible before it's consciously identified. A machine running hot sounds different. A machine about to jam has a frequency shift. The particular sound of a good day at the cutting table, where the fabric moves through cleanly and the cutter finds the pattern without fighting the material, is different from the sound of a bad day where everything is 5% harder than it should be. Today is a good day, in the factory's terms. Today the machines are running clean, and the material is cooperative, and the pace is there, and your hands are doing what your hands have learned to do, without requiring conscious direction. In your head, the 4-baht bottle, not obsessively. It arrives at the edges of your attention during the automatic portions of the work, when the motion is running on its groove and the foreground attention has space for background things. The specific quality of the alert that the Krating Daeng produced. Not brightness exactly, not the sharpening that you might associate with strong coffee, but something more like resolution. The removal of a blurriness you'd stopped noticing because it had been there for months, sitting between you and the world like a filter that accumulated gradually enough that you didn't register when it arrived. Without it this morning, the filter is back. You're aware of the filter now. This is useful and unwelcome information simultaneously. The 19th century is where the story of energy drinks becomes, in retrospect, inevitable. Not because of what the century created, because of what it created the conditions for. The Industrial Revolution, the name is too clean, too triumphant for what actually happened, moved large numbers of human beings from one type of exhaustion to another. Agricultural labour is exhausting. Ask any farmer, ask any rice paddy worker or grain harvester or person who has walked behind a plough for 8 hours in summer heat. The exhaustion of agricultural work is real and physical and total. But agricultural work is seasonal. It has rhythms that align, at least partially, with the rhythms of the human body. You work intensely during planting season and harvest season. You rest more during the winter, or during the monsoon, or during the period between harvests when there is less that the land immediately requires. The exhaustion is profound, but it respects to some degree the body's need for recovery. Factory work didn't. Factory work ran on the clock. The machine started at 6 a.m. whether you were ready or not. The machine ran until 10 p.m., sometimes midnight, and the workers who ran the machines ran with it. The 12-hour shift was standard in the early mills of Manchester and Birmingham and Leeds. The 14-hour shift was not unusual during peak production periods. Children of 7 and 8 years old worked these shifts because they were small enough to crawl under the machines to clear jams, which required small bodies but did not require child bodies specifically, though child bodies were cheaper. This is the context in which the patent medicine industry built itself. Patent medicines are not a category that exists anymore, at least not under that name. The name itself is somewhat misleading. Patent referred not to a patent in the intellectual property sense, but to a historical use of the term that meant the formula was secret, which is the opposite of what a patent means today. They were bottled preparations sold without prescription, without regulatory oversight, without any requirement that their contents match their labels or their claims match their effects. They were sold everywhere, by mail order from catalogues that reached every farm and village in America and Britain, by travelling salesmen who arrived in small towns and set up temporary stages and gave speeches about miraculous recoveries, in pharmacies and general stores alongside things that actually had clear medical functions. Most of them worked, in the way that works when your standard is this does something to the body that resembles what the label says. They worked because they contained things that did things to bodies. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, which was sold to mothers as a preparation for soothing teething infants, contained morphine, about 65 milligrams per fluid ounce. Given the doses recommended on the label and the size of an infant's body, this was approximately enough to kill an adult cat. It did reliably calm teething infants, in the way that sedating them with morphine will reliably calm anything. It was also implicated in an unknown but significant number of infant deaths. Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, marketed for female complaints, a term that covered everything from painful menstruation to the general existential difficulty of being a Victorian woman, contained about 18% alcohol, which is approximately the alcohol content of a strong wine. Women who took it as directed for extended periods were consuming the equivalent of several glasses of wine daily, which is one way to address the general existential difficulty of being a Victorian woman, though not perhaps the most targeted. Coca-Cola, created in 1886 by John Pemberton as a patent medicine before it became the world's most recognizable beverage, contained extract of coca leaf, which means cocaine in its less concentrated leaf form, and extract of cola nut, which means caffeine. The combination of stimulants produced an alert, energetic feeling that was real and reproducible and had a clear pharmacological explanation. The original marketing claimed it was a cure for headaches and morphine addiction, which was, as a list of claims for a cocaine and caffeine beverage, not entirely insane. Cocaine does address headaches, and the theory that one stimulant could address addiction to another is not without precedent, even if the specific claim about morphine addiction was not rigorously supported. The cocaine was removed from the Coca-Cola formula in 1903 after the Pure Food and Drug Act began applying pressure to patent medicines, and after cocaine had become associated in American public discourse with specific populations who were being targeted by early drug prohibition efforts. The caffeine remained. The formula, minus its most pharmacologically potent active ingredient, remained effective enough. The caffeine plus the sugar plus the carbonation delivered something real. That the product survived and eventually dominated the global beverage market for a century. This is the lineage of Krating Daeng. Not romantic, not clean, not the kind of lineage that gets celebrated in brand origin stories, but honest. The drink in the amber glass bottle is the direct descendant of the 19th century patent medicine industry. The industry that looked at overworked people and found a way to sell them something that helped, briefly, without fixing anything. The chemistry has been refined. The regulation has arrived. The active ingredients have been narrowed to things that are actually safe at the doses sold. The business model has not changed. The week after the first Krating Daeng is the week you start paying attention in a different way, not to the drink specifically, to the pattern, to the relationship between what you use and when you use it and what it costs and what it buys. Tuesday, you use one in the morning before the shift. You hit quota by 3:40. On the way home, your calf cramps again, but the fatigue is manageable. Wednesday, you don't use any. You have a rare night of adequate sleep, 6.5 hours, nearly unprecedented, and the shift runs on its own power. You're 3 units behind pace at midday but recover by early afternoon. Thursday, long night. Delivery runs until 2:30 a.m. 5 hours of sleep. You buy one before the shift, nurse it between 7 and 9, hit pace by noon, buy another at 2 p.m. to get through the afternoon dip. You hit 123. Friday. The factory is running a weekend overtime request. If you volunteer for Saturday morning, you get a small bonus and a half day on Monday. You volunteer. Friday night you ride until 3. You use a Krating Daeng at midnight, which is an experiment, using it earlier than usual. The experiment works up until 11 p.m, when you feel the beginning of the crash coming while you're still 3 fares from done. You buy another, 2 in one night. You sleep for 4 hours and feel it in the morning with the specificity that one Krating Daeng nights don't produce. There is a particular quality of tiredness that comes from having pushed the deferral system too hard, where the body's debt-collecting mechanism seems to have taken offence at being denied twice, and is making its position clear with emphasis. Your eyes feel like they have sand under the lids. Your right hand trembles slightly when you hold it out. Not dramatically. A friend wouldn't notice. You notice. You drink water. You eat breakfast. You go to the factory. By noon, the sand behind the eyes quality has reduced to merely tired. The tremor in the hand settles after the first hour of machine work. Your body, instructed by routine and by the fact that most of what it knows about existence is being at this machine, finds its way back. You hit quota, 120 on the nose. Somkiat nods. You go home. You sleep for 9 hours. 9 hours. The most you've slept since you arrived in Bangkok. You wake up with the sensation that someone has cleaned the inside of your skull. The ceiling stain is neither spider nor Europe. It is simply a water stain, abstract, requiring no interpretation. This is how you know you've slept. You feel what you're supposed to feel. You feel what the Krating Daeng is imitating. The specific alchemy that Mr&Mrs performed on the Krating Daeng formula between 1984 and 1987, between the handshake agreement with Chaleo and the April launch in Austria, has been described in various ways by various people, none of whom were fully inside the process. What is known is this. The formula was modified for European taste preferences. This sounds simple. It is not simple. Taste preference is cultural in ways that go deeper than conscious preference. Europeans in the mid-1980s had been conditioned by several centuries of a specific flavour profile for cold, sweet beverages. Fruity, slightly tart, recognisable as belonging to a category of natural origin sweetness. The Krating Daeng taste, medicinal sweetness, herbal undertone, the specific pharmaceutical adjacent quality that Thai consumers accepted because it was honest about what the drink was, sat outside this profile. The carbonation was the first change. Adding carbonation to a still beverage changes its character significantly. The bubbles add a sensory dimension that the original lacks. They carry aroma differently. They affect the pace of consumption. A carbonated drink you sip differently than a still one. The carbonation also affects the perception of sweetness. It slightly suppresses sweet notes, which made the pharmaceutical quality of the original taste less dominant. The sweetness was recalibrated. The original Krating Daeng was sweet in a specific way. Concentrated more sugar per volume than the formula ultimately required for effect, a reflection of its origins in a context where workers needed fast caloric delivery as well as stimulation. The Red Bull formula moderated this. Still sweet, still recognisably sweet, but with more complexity in the remaining flavour notes. The taurine content and the B vitamin content remained essentially unchanged. The caffeine was kept at 80 milligrams per 150 milliliter can, which is the dose that Mr&Mrs had identified as the effective minimum, enough to produce a clear effect in a majority of consumers, not so much that the cardiovascular response in first-time users was alarming. 80 milligrams is approximately the caffeine content of a small espresso. In the context of what would later become the energy drink market, 80 milligrams is remarkably moderate. Bang Energy, launched in 2012, would contain 300 milligrams per can. Rain would contain the same. Other brands would push to 350. 80 milligrams was conservative enough to be safe for most people in a single can, and high enough to be effective for the same majority. It was a medically defensible dose. This was important to Mr&Mrs, not primarily for ethical reasons, though the ethical component was probably not absent, but for regulatory reasons. He needed the product to survive European regulatory scrutiny. which was more rigorous than American scrutiny would prove to be. The can. The can deserves more attention than it usually gets in the Red Bull origin story. The choice of a slim, relatively small can, the 150 milliliter size, was not arbitrary and was not purely about mimicking the Krating Daeng bottle's proportions. It was a deliberate positioning statement. Standard soft drink cans in Europe in 1987 were 330 millilitres. The Red Bull can was less than half the volume. This meant that a Red Bull can cost approximately double the per milliliter price of a Coca-Cola or a Fanta. This could have been a problem. Mr&Mrs made it a feature. If the drink is sold in a small can at a high price, it is positioned as concentrated, as potent, as something to be taken in specific doses rather than casually consumed. The small can says, this is not refreshment in the way the refreshment is casual. This is something you take when you need it. The small size implies precision. The high price implies value. The can design, blue and silver, the two colours of sky and metal, cool and technological, communicated something specific about what category the product was meant to occupy. Not fruit drink, not soda. Something adjacent to medicine but not medicinal. Something adjacent to sports drink but not for the gym. Something that existed in a space that had not existed until the design created it. Mr&Mrs hired an advertising agency and gave them an instruction that was, by the standards of beverage advertising in 1987, unusual. Do not try to make the product approachable. Make it specific. Find the people it's for and talk to those people, and do not worry about the people it's not for. The resulting campaign produced the line, "Red Bull gives you wings," which became one of the most recognised advertising slogans in the subsequent decades. The line is technically a claim about energy and performance and the capacity to do things you couldn't do without it. And it is also, technically, not a claim that can be substantively verified or falsified, which is a quality that good advertising slogans tend to have. Red Bull does not give you wings. Nothing does. That is not the point of the line. The point of the line is a feeling, a direction, a sense that the consumption of this product moves you toward a version of yourself that is more capable, more mobile, more free from the literal and metaphorical weight of the ordinary. This is what the factory worker on Klong Toi felt when the Krating Daeng cleared the fog and the machine became manageable and the quota became achievable. Not literally wings, something adjacent, the restoration of functional capacity in a person who had reached its limits and needed more. The difference is the story. The factory worker's story was honest. I need to keep working, and I can't. The European consumer's story was aspirational. I want to do more and be more and go further. Both stories ended with the same molecule blocking the same receptors. What changed was what the consumer thought that meant about who they were. The European nightclub ecosystem of the late 1980s is difficult to describe to someone who wasn't inside it, and easy to remember with excessive nostalgia by someone who was. What it actually was, stripped of nostalgia and hagiography, was this. A large number of young people, in cities that were rebuilding their cultural infrastructure after the conservatism of the 1970s and the recession of the early 1980s, found in certain venues and certain musical forms a mode of collective experience that the daylight economy did not provide. The music was new, acid house from Chicago, techno from Detroit, filtered through Dusseldorf and then Berlin. The particular compression and repetition of electronic dance music, designed for specific acoustics and specific states of consciousness, and the specific social contract of a dance floor, where the individual dissolves partially into the collective without disappearing. The venues were large and dark and loud in a specific way. Not the loud of a concert where you're facing a stage, but the loud of a room, where the sound surrounds you and the bass frequency moves through your body as a physical event rather than an auditory one. The hours were long, the nights began late, much later than the conventional evening social hours. You arrived at midnight and stayed until 4 or 6, or until the venue closed, and the daylight outside was already establishing itself, and the people emerging from the exits were blinking in it with the particular expression of people who have been somewhere else and are reassembling themselves for the regular world. This was the ecosystem that found Red Bull. Not through Mateschitz' planning. He was targeting athletes and students. The nightclub crowd found the product through the specific logic of nightclubs. Someone brought it, someone else noticed the effect. Word moved through the social network at the speed of shared experience, and within a season it was there. In the clubs, in the pockets of people who were trying to dance until 6 a.m., in the hands of DJs who were playing 4-hour sets at 2 in the morning. The combination with vodka was not planned by anyone. It simply happened because both products were in the same environment. The neurological result, alert drunk, the suppression of sedation without the suppression of intoxication, was genuinely useful in the specific context of a nightclub at 3 a.m., where the goal is to remain active and social and on the dance floor, not to be sedated and lying on a couch. The bar owners noticed their customers staying longer, drinking more. The average spend per customer increased. This was good for business. The bar owners started stocking Red Bull. From the bars, the product spread to the larger culture, not through advertising primarily, through the specific informal economy of recommendation and shared experience. What are you drinking? This. Try it. The oldest mechanism of product diffusion, older than advertising, older than marketing, almost as old as products. By 1992, Red Bull was in the cultural DNA of European youth culture in a way that its formal advertising did not fully account for. The formal advertising had found its people. The informal diffusion had found everyone else. When Red Bull arrived in the United States in 1997, the American market presented different challenges than the European one had and different opportunities. Different challenge. The American beverage market in 1997 was saturated in ways that the European market in 1987 was not. Coca-Cola and Pepsi between them controlled enormous portions of retail shelf space, had established distribution systems that reached virtually every retail point in the country, and had experience and resources for competitive response that European competitors couldn't match. The question wasn't whether Red Bull could create a category. It had already created one in Europe, but whether it could hold that category against the inevitable American response. Different opportunity. The American relationship with both work and recreation was structured in ways that made the product more, not less, necessary. The American work week was long. The cultural expectation around productivity was more intense. The specific ethos of the 1990s, driven in part by the technology sector's explosion, in part by the financial sector's post-deregulation intensity, in part by a cultural conversation that was increasingly centered on performance and optimization, created a consumer base that was not just willing to buy something that helped them work and play harder, but was actively looking for it. The American response to Red Bull was genuinely enthusiastic in ways that the initial European response had not been. The European market had needed years to develop before it reached critical mass. The American market accepted the category faster, partly because the category had already been proven elsewhere, and partly because the American appetite for new things that claim to improve performance is, historically, essentially unlimited. The American market also produced the second-generation response, Monster Energy. Monster's insight about the American market was specific and correct. The consumer that Red Bull had found and cultivated was real, but the container and the price point and the aesthetic were all sized to a European sensibility that was not native to the American market. The European slim can, precise and controlled, was not the natural container for American consumption habits. Americans drank more, not less. Americans expected value in terms of volume. Americans had a different relationship with restraint. 16 ounces for $1 more than Red Bull's 8 ounces was not just a volume offer. It was a statement about what kind of product this was and what kind of person it was for. Not the European club goer with precise chemical intentions. The American kid who worked construction in the morning and skated in the afternoon, and needed the biggest dose available, and needed to not think too hard about what it cost per ounce. The Monster marketing machine went to every event where that kid might be, sponsored every competition, put cans in the hands of people who were filming themselves doing things on cameras that they would post to a nascent internet, built relationships with the specific micro-cultures, the skaters and the motocross riders and the drifters and the fishermen and eventually the gamers, that were too small for Red Bull's international budget to fully attend to. What Monster built was not an audience. It was a community, a loose, broadly defined community of people who did things that required intensity, and who had adopted the can with the claw marks as a sign of shared identity. The can was visible in hands and in footage and in the backgrounds of photographs. The brand diffused through the community the way brands diffuse through communities, by being genuinely present rather than performing presence. The first major American health controversy around energy drinks arrived in 2011 and 2012, when a cluster of deaths and serious adverse events was reported to the FDA in association with Monster Energy. The cases were complex, as these cases usually are. The individuals involved had varying degrees of pre-existing cardiac conditions. The amount consumed varied. The circumstances varied. Establishing direct causation between a specific energy drink consumed on a specific occasion and a specific cardiac event is genuinely difficult medically and legally. The Monster lawyers knew this. Their legal strategy was consistent with the technical facts, pre-existing conditions, individual variation, comparable risk of coffee, warnings on the label, personal responsibility. The technical facts were correct. The substantive adequacy of those facts for addressing the question being asked, is this product safe, and for whom, and at what doses, and under what circumstances, was a different matter. The specific issue with energy drinks and cardiac events is not that caffeine at the doses in a single can is acutely dangerous for most people. It is not. The issue is a combination of factors. The marketing to adolescents whose cardiovascular systems are still developing, the normalization of multiple can consumption in a single session, which was culturally established by the Monster 16-ounce can and then pushed further by higher caffeine products. The combination with alcohol, which masked intoxication, and led to consumption patterns that would not have occurred with either substance alone. And the selection effect by which the product was disproportionately consumed by people who are already sleep-deprived and physically stressed, who are precisely the population for whom adding significant caffeine creates the most cardiovascular stress. None of these factors individually constituted a strong case that the product was broadly dangerous. Together, they constituted a reasonable case that the product was being sold to people who are more vulnerable to its effects than the average healthy adult that the safety research used as its baseline. The Senate Commerce Committee held hearings in 2013. Various senators asked various questions about marketing to minors, about caffeine disclosure requirements, about whether energy drink companies should be required to report adverse events the way pharmaceutical companies were. The energy drink industry sent representatives. The representatives made the arguments available to them. The caffeine comparison to coffee, the individual responsibility argument, the pre-existing conditions, the warning labels. The outcome was guidance rather than regulation. Voluntary disclosure guidelines, recommendations, not mandates. The market continued to grow. What did change was the culture of disclosure. Most major energy drink companies, in the years following the congressional attention, added more prominent labeling about caffeine content and warnings about consumption by pregnant women and adolescents. Some voluntarily disclosed total caffeine in their products, including caffeine from all sources including guarana, which had sometimes been listed as a separate ingredient without its caffeine content being included in the total. These were genuine improvements. They were also not the changes that would have addressed the underlying structural problem, which was that the product was being sold in a market that had strong incentives to sell as much of it as possible to the people who are most motivated to buy it, who are also the people who are most at risk from overconsumption. This is not a problem unique to energy drinks. It is the fundamental tension of an unregulated stimulant market. The people who want the product most are the people who are most depleted and most need the recovery that only sleep provides, and who are consequently the most vulnerable to the cycle of stimulation and crash and re-stimulation that the product enables. The cycle is not hidden. It is legible in the design of the product. A stimulant that wears off in 4 to 6 hours, sold in a market where the conditions producing the need for stimulation continue around the clock, will naturally produce repeat purchase behavior in the people most affected by those conditions. The business model works because the human condition is consistent. In military contexts, the energy drink issue crystallized into something that the military's hierarchical structure allowed to be addressed more directly than the civilian market could. By 2013, multiple branches of the US military had issued specific guidance about energy drink consumption. The Army's guidance, the most comprehensive, set recommended maximum daily caffeine intake from all sources, including energy drinks, and recommended specific timing limitations. Not after 1400 hours if the mission required full cognitive function before 0200. Not within 6 hours of an operation requiring fine motor precision. These guidelines were medically rational. They were grounded in the actual pharmacokinetics of caffeine, how long it takes to metabolize, at what doses it shifts from enhancing to impairing performance, what the specific interactions are with sleep deprivation at different severity levels. The guidelines had limited effect on behavior, not because soldiers were reckless or ignorant, because the conditions that drove the consumption, the operational tempo, the deployment schedule, the hours available for sleep versus the hours required for mission readiness, were not addressed by the guidelines. If you tell someone in a situation that requires 50 hours of wakefulness in a 72-hour period that they should limit their caffeine intake, you have told them something that is medically sound and contextually irrelevant. They will nod. They will continue. The guidelines were an attempt to address a molecular problem when the problem was structural. The structure was not going to change because of the guidelines. The Amazon Fulfillment Center in New Jersey was not, as a physical environment, oppressive in the obvious sense. The lights worked, the temperature was controlled, the bathrooms were there and there were enough of them. The safety rules were real and posted and enforced. By the standards of a 19th century mill or a 1980s Bangkok textile factory, the working conditions were, on their face, dramatically better. What was different was the speed. The algorithm knew to the level of individual seconds how long each pick should take. It calculated the time from when you were assigned a task to when you completed it, and compared that number to the standard derived from aggregate historical performance. If your rate fell below a certain threshold, not immediately, not for a single slow pick, but over the course of a shift, the system generated an alert. The alert went to a manager. The manager had a conversation. The conversations were not aggressive. They were administrative. They used the specific language of metrics and expectations and performance improvement. They were documented. The documentation could be used, if circumstances required, to justify a formal corrective process that could result in termination. This was not different in its logic from the quota at the textile factory in Klong Tui. The logic was identical. There is a number, you're below the number, the consequences of remaining below the number are employment ending. What was different was the precision and the granularity. The Bangkok factory measured in daily units. The algorithm measured in seconds. Working under granular, real-time measurement of your performance produces a specific kind of sustained stress that the body registers differently from the sustained stress of physical labour alone. The muscles ache from the 12 miles of concrete. The eyes ache from the overhead lights. And somewhere in the autonomic nervous system, the measurement system is keeping its own account of what sustained surveillance costs the organism. The caffeine in the Monster Energy can help with the physical fatigue. It was less clear that it helped with the surveillance stress. Some research suggests caffeine can increase anxiety under conditions of already elevated cortisol, which is what sustained stress produces. The relationship between the stimulant and the stress it was being used to manage was not straightforwardly beneficial. This was not something anyone had time to think about at 10:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The pick rate was the thing. The rate target was the thing. The can helped with the rate target. The rate target was what mattered. You scanned, you picked, you walked. The scanner beeped its approval or redirected you. The cart filled, the miles accumulated, the coffee shop smell of the Monster dissipated in the conditioned air within minutes. The caffeine stayed. Destiny, next to you in the third aisle, was singing something quietly to herself as she worked. Not quite audibly, just the shape of it, rhythm rather than melody. This was her system. Music in her head, cadence in her feet. The pick rate managed through a personal tempo that the algorithm happened to accept. Everyone had a system. The systems were not provided. They were developed. The specific personal technology of surviving the shift that each worker built from whatever materials their experience and temperament offered. Music in your head. The specific breathing pattern that keeps the shoulders from locking up. The route optimization you develop after enough weeks in the same section to know which aisle approaches are faster. The relationship with the scanner that lets you process its beep and redirect before the cart has fully stopped. And the can. The Monster Energy can was the most widely shared system in the building. Not universal, some people didn't use caffeine, some people had their own systems that didn't include it. Some people burn through on adrenaline and youth and the specific reserves of people who are 20 years old, and haven't yet encountered the limits of those reserves, but common enough that you could look down almost any aisle in the building and see the green and black can sitting in the mesh pocket of a vest or resting on a shelf while its owner was mid-pick. This was not a failure of human resolve. This was not a generation that couldn't handle hard work. This was people doing what people have always done when the conditions demand it, finding the available tool and using it. They're a kind of mathematics that applies to the energy drink market that is distinct from the mathematics of the balance sheet. It's the mathematics of deferral. Every can of energy drink sold represents a deferred sleep debt. The consumer was tired. They consumed the product. They continued functioning. The tiredness did not go away but was postponed. The can generated revenue for the company and functioned for the consumer. Both parties received something. At the moment of the transaction, this looks like a fair exchange. Over time, the mathematics changes. If the deferral is occasional, if the energy drink is genuinely a supplement to adequate rest rather than a substitute for it, if the person who drinks it has mostly slept enough and is using caffeine to push through a specific finite period of higher demand, the mathematics is relatively straightforward. The deferral is temporary, the debt is paid, the body resets. If the deferral is structural, if the conditions that produce the tiredness are permanent and unavoidable, if the energy drink is the primary mechanism for managing chronic sleep deprivation rather than an occasional tool, the mathematics becomes compounding. Chronic sleep deprivation produces cumulative cognitive impairment that develops faster than the person experiencing it can detect. This is because one of the first cognitive functions impaired by sleep deprivation is the accurate self-assessment of cognitive impairment. You feel more capable than you are. You perform more poorly than you think you're performing. The gap between perceived and actual capacity widens without your knowledge. This specific quality, the way sleep deprivation hides itself, the way the impaired person is often the last to know they're impaired, makes the chronic use of stimulants to manage chronic sleep deprivation particularly insidious. The caffeine partially restores subjective alertness without fully restoring objective performance. The person feels better than they are. They continue. The debt compounds. The mathematics of the energy drink market is, at its bottom layer, the mathematics of compounding debt sold as a loan with variable terms as no amortization schedule. The product does not communicate this. The product communicates wings. The esports ecosystem that had developed by 2020 was, by any reasonable measure, a serious economic and cultural phenomenon. Tournament prize pools for individual events exceeded the prizes for many established professional sports. Viewership for major events streamed online competed with broadcast television audiences for major sporting events. Sponsorships from major brands, not just energy drink companies, but automotive, technology, financial services, reflected an understanding that this was not a niche entertainment category. The players who competed at the highest levels of games like League of Legends or Dota 2 or Counter-Strike were professional athletes in the sense that mattered. They trained daily. They maintained physical fitness because cognitive performance is linked to physical health. They had coaches and support staff and psychological counselors, and they competed in the full knowledge that their windows of peak performance were narrow. Peak performance in esports is concentrated in the late teens and early 20s for most games. The reaction time advantage that young players have is real, measurable, and begins to decline in the mid to late 20s in ways that are gradual but cumulative. Players who remained competitive into their late 20s were either outliers in their physical reaction time decline or had compensated through tactical superiority and game knowledge that offset some of the physical disadvantage. The energy drink companies that had found their home in this ecosystem had made peace with the specific paradox. The people who most needed the cognitive benefits of adequate sleep and minimal stimulant dependency were the same people their advertising most enthusiastically targeted. The best way to maintain cognitive peak performance in esports is not to drink energy drinks. It is to sleep adequately, eat well, exercise, manage stress, and use caffeine strategically and moderately. The energy drink industry did not advertise this for understandable commercial reasons. The streamers and content creators who were the primary advertising vectors for the products were, by the nature of their work schedules, streaming to audiences in multiple time zones, which means streaming at hours that don't respect circadian rhythms, which means consistent sleep deprivation, among the heaviest users of the products they were advertising. This is an elegant, terrible closed loop. The product causes a need for itself, and the people who are paid to promote it are demonstrably harmed by the level at which they consume it, and the harm is invisible because the promotion normalizes the consumption as a lifestyle feature rather than a stress response. Here is what Chalio Uvidya knew that the people who came after him sometimes seem to forget. He knew who the drink was for, not in the demographic sense, not in the market research sense, in the human sense. The drink was for the truck driver who needed to get to Chiang Mai by morning and couldn't stop because stopping cost money. The drink was for the construction worker on the overnight pour who couldn't let the concrete set wrong, because reworking it cost time that cost money that came out of the worker's portion. The drink was for the factory shift worker, the motorcycle taxi driver, the market vendor who needed to be alert at 4 a.m. because that's when the fresh produce arrived, and you had to be sharp to get the best price. These were people who needed functional capacity when their bodies were past providing it. Not inspiration, not wings, function. The ability to see the road clearly, to operate the machine safely, to count change correctly, to navigate the traffic. Chaleo sold them a tool. What came after? The wings, the extreme sports, the Felix Baumgartner falling from 39 kilometers above the earth in a Red Bull suit, the esports tournaments, the billion-dollar valuations, the congressional hearings, the 500 brands. All of this was the tool being sold as something else to people who didn't need the original thing. Not that the people who bought it for the other reasons were wrong to buy it. They were buying something that worked for a real problem they had, even if the problem was going out stamina rather than shift work or exhaustion. The molecule doesn't distinguish. The molecule just blocks the receptor. What happened after was the story of a very useful tool becoming a very large story about a tool, and the story outgrowing the tool, and the tool continuing to work quietly underneath the story, unchanged. 4 baht, $8, same transaction, somewhere in the Isan region of Thailand, in a province with red soil and rice paddies, and distances between villages that feel longer than they are because there is so little between them. The year is still the same year it's always been in villages like this, which is to say it's the year of planting, or the year of harvest, or the year of the long wait between them. The distance from here to Bangkok is about 400 kilometers. The bus that goes there leaves the provincial capital at 6 in the evening and arrives at the southern bus terminal just before midnight, which is when Bangkok is settling into its middle register. Not the peak of the evening, not the depth of the night. Somewhere between the two. Off the bus, everything is different. The smell is different. The volume is different. The number of people per square meter is different. The fact that the streets are still full at midnight is different. Everything is different except one thing, the need. The need, the basic, human, structural, economic need to work in exchange for money, and to work enough and to keep working when the work is hard and the hours are long, and the body is telling you things the situation doesn't allow you to hear. That need is not different. That need has never been different. That need is why the coffee was discovered in the Ethiopian highlands, and why the Ottoman merchants built 600 houses for it, and why the Japanese pharmaceutical company put taurine in a glass bottle in 1962, and why a man from Fichit, who grew up selling ducks, made something specific and useful for people who needed something specific and useful, and sold it for 4 baht. That need is why tonight, somewhere in Bangkok and New Jersey and Osaka and Lagos and Sao Paulo, and every other city where people work at hours when sleep would be appropriate, someone is cracking open a can or a bottle or a tiny glass vial of whatever their local market produces and drinking it and continuing. The river runs south to the sea. You're on the motorcycle, heading back from a fair on the Thonburi side, crossing the bridge at dawn with the city spread out around you, and the Chao Phraya below, and the boats beginning their morning routes, and the quality of the light, exactly at the edge of the transition from not yet dawn to almost dawn, which is not the same at actual dawn, but which has its own quality, and which lasts only a few minutes before the day asserts itself. You stop the motorcycle on the bridge. This is technically not allowed. You do it anyway. You have 4 minutes before you need to be moving to be home before 7, which is the deadline you've set for yourself on the days when the factory shift starts at 10 rather than 6, which this Thursday is, which means you have approximately 3 free hours between arriving home and leaving for work, which is more margin than most days allow. 4 minutes on the bridge. The river is grey and moving. The boats are small from this height. The buildings on both banks are ordinary buildings, apartments and shops and the backs of warehouses, made briefly extraordinary by the light that is arriving from the east at an angle that makes the wet surfaces catch something. You're tired. The specific 23 hours awake tired that is different in quality from the general tiredness of chronic insufficient sleep. The edges of your vision have a slight unreality to them, a softness that isn't quite optical. Your hands on the handlebars are automatic. The decision to stop and look has been made by some part of you that is running independently of the tired part, some portion that is still curious, that is still doing the work of being young and in a place that is bigger than you. The Krating Daeng from 2 a.m. has worn off completely. The adenosine, patient as always, has reclaimed its territory. The tired you're feeling is honest tired, the real thing, not the deferred version. The 4 bahts worth of borrowed time has been paid back. You're at the edge. The edge is not a bad place to be, not dangerous, not permanent. The sleep is waiting on the other side of it. The 9-hour sleep or the 6-hour sleep or whatever the morning allows. The body knows how to do this. The body has been doing this for 2 years longer, for 22 years, for as long as bodies have been bodies. The light on the water, the boats, the city's sound at this hour, different from 3 in the morning, different from noon. A specific chord of things beginning and things ending simultaneously, as the night workers head home and the day workers head out, and Bangkok does the thing it does, which is continue. This is enough. 4 minutes is enough. You've seen the river from this bridge in this light at this hour, and it is specific and it is yours in the way that a moment is yours when you're the one standing in it. You kick the motorcycle to life. You go home. The sleep, when it comes, is the longest conversation your body has been allowed to have with itself in weeks. It starts before you expect it to. You've been awake long enough that the transition from wakefulness to sleep is not a drift, but a sudden relinquishment. The way a held breath releases, not gradually but all at once. One moment you're on the mat, aware of the ceiling, aware of the sounds from the soi below. The next moment you're not aware of anything. In the first hour of sleep, the body runs its deepest maintenance cycle. Slow wave sleep, delta waves moving through the cortex in long, rolling patterns. Human growth hormone released from the pituitary, which sounds like an athletic thing and is an athletic thing. It's used by the body for cellular repair, for muscle recovery, for the repair of small injuries that accumulate in tissue that is used hard and rested insufficiently. In the second and third hours, the cycle continues. The adenosine that has been accumulating is metabolized and cleared. The cytokine load that supports immune function is restored. The specific process of memory consolidation, the transfer of the day's experiences from short-term to long-term storage, the reinforcement of the procedural skills embedded in the neural pathways that run the machine and the motorcycle and the navigation of the city. This process runs in the background, the overnight backup completing while the system is offline. In the fourth and fifth hours, the dreams come. Not the half-dreams of insufficient sleep, the fragmentary images that arrive when the body is too tired to properly reach REM but too tired to refuse it. Real dreams, the kind that have narrative logic and sensory completeness, that occupy the dreamer fully, that are specific enough to be remembered and strange enough to resist full explanation. You're somewhere that is not Bangkok, but that has Bangkok's quality. The machine is there, but different. Bunmi is there, but you are the same age, which means something is off about time. The bottle is there. The river is there, moving faster than rivers move, with a specific urgency. The shop girl is still doing her homework. The dreams are the brain making sense of what it's gathered. Not literally, not as autobiography, as pattern. As the processing that happens when the day's inputs are finally allowed to run through the whole system without interruption. In the sixth hour, you dream of Chiang Mai, the specific smell of your mother's kitchen, the specific texture of the rice field in late harvest, the stalks dry and gold brown, the faces of people you've not seen in 2 years but whose presence in your memory is so complete that in the dream they are simply there, the way things that are always there are there, without announcement, without significance, simply part of the world. In the seventh hour, you are beginning to surface, not awake, but approaching. The way the body, having done what it needed to do, begins its return. The sounds from outside filtering through now, a motorcycle in the soi, a vendor's call, the particular rhythm of the city's morning commerce reaching the frequency at which your brain admits it. In the eighth hour, you're nearly there. The ceiling materializes, the water stain, neither spider nor Europe, just a stain. You lie there for a moment without getting up. This is a luxury you rarely allow yourself and are allowing yourself this morning because the shift doesn't start until 10 and it is 8:47 by the cheap clock on the windowsill. 1 hour and 13 minutes, enough for breakfast, enough for the walk rather than the motorcycle for once, because the weather is clear and your legs have been asking for something that isn't sitting on a motorcycle seat for approximately 18 months. You walk to the noodle stand. Auntie Som is there, of course. She's always there. She was probably there before the noodle stand existed somehow, drawing the noodle stand into being around her through sheer persistence. She's been in this location for 20 years, according to her own account, and longer according to the buildings around her, which look at her stall with the slightly protective lean of buildings that have been sharing a sidewalk with the same person long enough to have feelings about it. She takes one look at you. You slept 8 hours. She makes a sound that is the positive version of the sound she makes about 4 hours, a sound of modest approval, a sound that says, "Good, finally, it was about time." She gives you the good bowl, the one with the extra pork and the fresh herbs on top, and the bone broth that has been simmering since 3 in the morning. You know this is the good bowl because you've been eating here long enough to know the difference between the regular bowl and the good bowl. And the good bowl is what she gives people she thinks deserve it on a given day. You eat it slowly. The broth is deep and specific. Pork bone and star anise and something else that you've never been able to identify and have never asked about, because some things are better approached as phenomena than as recipes. The heat of it arrives in your chest and spreads outward in the particular way that hot broth spreads, which is not the same as the spread of warmth from coffee or tea, but something older and more animal, the warmth of food that has been made slowly from things that were once living. Around you, Auntie Som's regulars are doing what they do, the construction workers from the site down the Suai, eating in the rapid, efficient manner of people who've allotted 20 minutes for a meal and intend to use all of it on the meal and none of it on anything else. The woman from the accounting office around the corner, eating with a notebook open beside her, reading while she eats with the concentration of someone who has made peace with doing 2 things at once. A child in school uniform eating the mildest thing on the menu, under the supervision of a grandmother who's watching the soi with the watchfulness of grandmothers everywhere. You eat your noodles, you drink the broth, you think about the shift starting at 10, about the machine at your station, waiting, about the lever and the fabric and the 5,000 cycles that today will require. No Krating Daeng this morning. The sleep was 8 hours. The broth is deep and hot. Your hands are steady. The day can be managed on what the day has. This feels like information. Like the body communicating something it's been trying to say for a while through a different channel. You heard it. Years will pass, the machine will keep running. The bottle will stay on the shelf. The driver will need the fare. The student will need the hour. The soldier will need the alertness, the nurse will need the shift, and the parents of the newborn at 2 in the morning, who have been awake since Tuesday and it is now Saturday, will need whatever they can get from whatever is in the refrigerator, and they will find something, and it will work for a few hours, and the baby will cry again at 4, and they will get up. Because people get up. Because the adenosine clears and the morning comes and the children need feeding and the work continues and the world does not stop for exhaustion. The world has never stopped for exhaustion. It has only sometimes offered something that made exhaustion temporarily thinkable. A leaf, a root, a berry from a shrub in the Ethiopian highlands, a preparation dissolved in hot water, a tonic in a small glass bottle, a can with wings on the label. The chemistry inside the thing is almost beside the point at this scale. What the thing represents is the human refusal, or the human inability which amounts to the same thing, to stop when the work isn't done, to stop when the money isn't made, to stop when there is someone else depending on you not stopping. The drink is the agent of that refusal, the small, affordable, accessible, legible agent. The thing that says, I know you're tired. Here, keep going. And people keep going. They have been keeping going for as long as there's been something to go toward. The candle at the end of your longest days is not dramatic. It is just the body finally spending what's left, the way you spend the last coins in a pocket, carefully, on the things that matter most. The motorcycle is off, the helmet is hanging, the shoes are at the door. The mat is where it always is, in the corner, at the angle that catches the slightly cooler air from the window on the nights when there is slightly cooler air. You lie down. The city continues outside, of course. It doesn't need your participation to continue. Bangkok at midnight has its own business, its own population of night shift workers and delivery drivers and security guards and medical staff and all the others who maintain the infrastructure of a city that pretends to sleep but doesn't. Not really. Not all the way. But that's outside. In here, in this room, in this specific rectangle of approximately 12 square meters, where you share a floor with Kunpi's even breathing and noise work blouses hanging in a row by the window, there is a quieter thing happening. The body deciding it is done, not the mind. The mind has opinions and would like to continue having them. The mind has been cataloguing the day's events and extracting their lessons and organising information about next week's quota and calculating how many more months before the envelope going to Chiang Mai can be slightly larger. But the body has already made its decision. The body is done. It will have the mind in a moment. It has the patience to wait. Let the traffic thin. Let the last tuk-tuks return to their stands. Let the noodle stalls pack their carts. Let the monks rise for morning prayers, which will happen before the city knows it's morning, which is their particular practice and their particular gift. Let the river run in the dark. It has been running in the dark for longer than the city on its banks and will continue running in the dark long after. Let the fluorescent tube in the corner shop on Yaowarat Road keep its faint flicker, and let the shop girl sleep with her cheek on her homework, and let the 4 baht bottle stand in its row of 4 baht bottles, waiting for whoever needs one next. Let the machine at Station 3 in the cutting room wait for the morning. Let the money wait in the envelope. Let the distance between here and Chiang Mai be, for these hours, something other than a fact that requires action. Let everything that requires going wait for a few hours while the going rests. You are tired enough. You are fed enough. You are, for now, still enough. The thing that's been chasing you through the day, the quota, the fare, the debt, the distance, the gap between what you have and what you're trying to build, it knows where you are. It'll find you in the morning. It always does. But the morning is the morning. This is now. This is the mat, and the breathing, and the dark, and the sounds from outside becoming the sounds inside your sleep. The adenosine finally, doing what the adenosine does, the debt being paid in the only currency that satisfies it, the rest. The deep, dark, ancient, body-insisted, biology-commanded rest. Let it have you. You've been fighting it all day. Stop fighting. It is not the enemy. It is the thing that makes everything else possible. It is what you're made of. Let it in. Good night. The body keeps a ledger in a language that has no words. Not metaphorically, literally. The body records what happens to it with a fidelity that outperforms any diary or medical chart, encoding the information in the tissue itself, in the density of bone and the architecture of muscle fibre, and the scarring patterns of repeatedly stressed connective tissue, and the particular changes in the cardiovascular system that occur when the cardiovascular system is asked to perform more than its design specification for extended periods. You're 22 years old, and your body has been keeping this ledger for 22 years. Most of what's in it is not remarkable. the ordinary record of an ordinary body navigating the ordinary demands of a life in Chiang Mai and then Bangkok. But the last 2 years have added entries that are different in quality from what came before. Not catastrophic entries, not permanent damage, not yet, not unless the entries keep accumulating, but specific information. The way your right hand trembles on extended mornings after short nights, which began 4 months ago and which is not alarming by clinical standards, but which is a data point. The colds that arrive every 6 weeks, more regular than seasons, more reliable than any schedule you've kept. The immune system keeping its own accounts. The dreams that come when you've pushed past the 20-hour mark. Not quite nightmares, not quite hallucinations, but a specific quality of unreality that arrives at the edges of experience when the brain has been running too long on insufficient maintenance. Things from the corner of your vision that resolve into something else when you look at them directly. The feeling of having left something somewhere important without being able to remember what it was. These are the body's communications. The Krating Daeng doesn't make them stop. Nothing makes them stop except the thing that makes them stop, which is sleep. But the Krating Daeng quiets them for a few hours, moves them to the background, lets the foreground be the machine, the fare, the quota, the work. This is its specific usefulness. This is also its specific limitation. The history of the science of caffeine is the history of scientists trying to catch up with something that people already knew worked. The coffee drinkers of the Ottoman Empire didn't need a biochemical explanation for why coffee helped. The explanation was, it helped. The mechanism was secondary to the experience. The molecule was named in 1819 when a German chemist named Friedrich Ferdinand Runge isolated it from coffee beans. He called it caffabase, coffee alkaloid. The name went through several iterations in subsequent decades before settling on caffeine, which was the version that stuck. The discovery of the specific mechanism, the adenosine receptor blockade, came much later. It was only in the 1970s and 1980s that pharmacologists developed the tools to identify what caffeine was actually doing at the receptor level, to track the adenosine accumulation and clearance, to understand the relationship between the molecule structure and the specific site where it acted. By the time Krating Daeng was on the shelf in Bangkok, the scientist was still working this out. What Chaleo knew was what the workers told him. This helps. You feel better. You work better. For bait. It keeps moving. The science validated decades later what the workers already knew. This happens more often than the scientific community sometimes acknowledges. The traditional medicine precedes the mechanism. The folk knowledge precedes the research. The body, the original laboratory, reports its findings first. The taurine in the drink is a good example. When taurine was added to the Japanese formulations in the 1960s, the specific mechanism of its effect was not well understood. There was research suggesting it had roles in cardiovascular function, and neural signaling and various other processes, but the exact contribution to the experience of the person drinking the tonic was unclear. By the 2000s and 2010s, the research had clarified somewhat. Taurine appeared to have antioxidant properties and to modulate certain aspects of cellular stress response. In combination with caffeine, there was evidence of effects that were greater than caffeine alone. Not dramatically greater, not the miracle synergy the marketing would occasionally imply, but real and measurable in controlled studies. The workers in the Japanese factories of the 1960s who found lipovitamin-D effective didn't need the mechanism. They needed the effect. The effect was there. The mechanism showed up later, like a scientist arriving after the experiment has already been running for 40 years to explain what the participants had already figured out. There is a specific quality to the week in Bangkok in November that is different from other times of year. Not dramatically different. Bangkok doesn't do dramatic seasonal shifts. It does the wet season and the dry season and the slightly cooler than normal months that the city calls winter, with a commitment to understatement that is itself almost a seasonal characteristic. November is the transition, the end of the wet season. The temperature dropping by perhaps 3 degrees from October, which 3 degrees in a place that lives at 30 does not sound like much, and is, to the body that has been living at 30, a perceptible relief, a loosening, a slight easing of the pressure that humidity and heat apply to every surface that exists in their presence. In November, you can sometimes smell the city differently. Not better, exactly. The chow fryer still carries what the chow fryer carries. The market still smells like what markets in Bangkok smell like, which is fish and produce and the specific sweet smoke of the food grills, and underneath everything the smell of a lot of people living in close proximity to each other. The factory still smells like the factory. But in November, when the wind comes off the Gulf of Thailand rather than off the paddy fields of the interior, there is sometimes a salt note underneath everything else, a reminder that this city is not far from the sea, that the river it's built on goes somewhere, that the ships in the port are not decorative, they are actual ships going to actual places carrying actual things. The salt smell is small, you could miss it, but you've learned to notice the small things, which is one of the skills the city teaches if you're willing to learn it. How to pay attention to the thing that is small and specific and yours in an environment so large and general that you could spend years in it without attaching to any particular piece of it. The salt smell is yours. The specific angle of the light at 5:45 in the morning when you're unlocking the motorcycle. The sound of the particular temple bell that is audible from the soil when the traffic quiets enough. These small calibrations, these sensory anchor points in a place that is otherwise enormous and indifferent. This is how the city becomes yours, gradually, over the months and years that your uncle described as the necessary investment. Not through anything formal or official, through the specific accumulated experience of having been in a place long enough that the place has been in you. The Krating Daeng bottle sitting on the shelf in the corner shop on Yowrut Road is part of this. Not the bottle itself, not the drink itself. The specific memory of the first time it worked, the fog clearing, the hand finding the handlebar, the road becoming legible at 4 in the morning when 21-hour tired had been making the road something else. That moment is in the ledger now, not the body's ledger of physical cost. The other ledger, the one that records what worked, what helped, what made the hard thing possible. The man who's going to change what that bottle means is, right now in 1982, on a business trip that he doesn't yet know will be the pivot of his professional life. Dietrich Mateschitz has a headache. He has the specific headache of the long-haul traveller, the kind that comes from jet lag compounded by recycled cabin air, compounded by too much coffee, on the flight compounded by the specific stress of conducting business in a foreign language, in a foreign culture where the social codes are different from the ones you've internalized. It is not a dramatic headache. It is a persistent, low-level, chronic presence headache that has been accompanying him since he arrived, and that the aspirin he carries in his briefcase addresses only partially. Someone suggests Krating Daeng in the specific version of this story that has become canonical. told so many times that the details have the slightly smooth quality of a story that has been refined rather than simply remembered. Metshitz tries the drink and his headache disappears, and he has a moment of recognition that the product is something extraordinary. The headache disappearing is probably true. Caffeine is an effective treatment for caffeine withdrawal headaches, and a traveller who's been relying on the particular coffee infrastructure of a European work life and has found himself without access to it in Bangkok is exactly the kind of person who would have a caffeine withdrawal headache that would respond to a Krating Daeng. The recognition is probably also true, in the sense that something clicked. Something about the gap in the European market and the ability of this product to fill it. What is almost certainly more complex than the story suggests is the internal process of what followed. 3 years passed between the first Krating Daeng and the agreement with Chaleo. 3 years is a long time for a decision that, in retrospect, seems obvious. 3 years of working out the details, not just the formula and the packaging, but the deeper question of whether the thing he thought he saw in Bangkok was real. Whether the European consumer would accept something that tasted like medicine. Whether the specific market he imagined existed, or whether he was projecting onto a gap that was actually empty for a reason. The $500,000 he invested was his personal money. He had to leave his job to pursue it. This was not a small risk. This was the kind of risk that ends careers if the assessment is wrong and creates fortunes if it's right. And the honest truth is that in 1984, nobody could have told you for certain which outcome was more likely. What Metshitz had that made the risk manageable, not in the financial sense, but in the psychological sense, was a specific and confident theory about European consumer behaviour. He believed that young Europeans in the late 1980s were underserved by the available beverage options when it came to the specific use case of needing to be alert and energetic at a time or in a situation where alertness and energy were at a premium. He believed that the product that addressed this need would be bought if it was priced and positioned correctly. He was right. The rightness of his belief does not depend on the ethics of what was built afterward. The product worked for a real need. The marketing that built the brand in Europe and then globally was, in many ways, brilliant. The sponsorship strategy that attached Red Bull to extreme sports created genuine value for those sports and a genuine community around the brand that was not entirely manufactured. But the original insight, the insight that made all of it possible, was not Matischitz's insight. The insight was Chaleo's. Chaleo saw the tired people. Chaleo made the drink for the tired people. Chaleo's insight was, these people need this. How much can they afford? 4 baht. Make it for 4 baht. Matischitz's insight was a second-order insight. These people need this, but these people don't tell the story I want to tell. What if I find different people and tell their story instead? It is a more profitable insight. It is not a more true one. There is a question that doesn't get asked enough when the energy drink industry is discussed, which is, what would happen if the conditions that create the market were addressed instead of the market? What would happen if night shift work included mandatory rest breaks of sufficient length to allow the circadian dip to be managed through a brief sleep rather than a caffeine dose? What would happen if algorithmic rate targets in fulfillment centers were set at levels that a well-rested person at standard performance could meet, rather than at levels that require the sustained effort of a person who is either very young or very caffeinated, or both? What would happen if the academic calendar were structured around evidence-based understanding of adolescent sleep needs, rather than around the logistical convenience of keeping school buildings occupied in the morning hours. What would happen is probably this. The market for energy drinks would be significantly smaller. The products that remained would be used for their original honest purpose, the occasional supplement for a specific finite period of higher than normal demand, the long night before a significant event, the final push in a project with a real deadline, the adjustment period after a transatlantic flight, the things that genuinely happen to people who are otherwise getting adequate rest and occasionally need more. That market is real. That need is real. The product for that market and that need would be genuinely useful. It would be a much smaller market. The $50 billion market depends on the chronic tiredness, on the structural conditions that make the short nights and the long shifts and the multiple jobs and the insufficient rest not exceptions but norms. The industry exists at scale because exhaustion exists at scale, and exhaustion exists at scale because the economic arrangements of the modern world have decided or have evolved to function as if they've decided that human need for rest is an inconvenience to be managed rather than a fundamental requirement to be accommodated. Chalio saw this and made 4 bet the cost of managing it. Matishitz saw this and made $8 the aspiration to be associated with managing it. Both were correct about the market. Both were correct about the tiredness. The tiredness was the product. This is the last thing before sleep, not a lesson. Lessons are for morning when the mind is fresh and the day is ahead, and there is time to take what has been learned and do something with it. This is just the last thing, which is, you were here. In Bangkok, in the cutting room, on the motorcycle at 3 a.m, on the plastic stool on Yaowarat Road with the amber bottle cold in your hand. You were here and you were tired and you used the available tool and you kept going. In New Jersey, in the fulfillment center, walking the 12th mile with the scanner in your hand and the monster energy doing what it does in the 20 minutes it does it. You were here. In Vienna, in the early years when the small blue-silver can was a strange new object that people tasted and made faces at, someone was here, trying it, deciding it helped. In the Ethiopian highlands, a very long time ago, someone was here, noticing what the plants did, taking the information seriously, sharing it. You were here, all of you. All of the tired people in all of the moments when the drink existed in some form to be taken, you were here, doing the work, pushing through, keeping going. The world is kept going by tired people. It always has been. It probably always will be. The best we can do, the specific, personal, available thing, is to know the difference between the loan and the gift. The caffeine is a loan. The sleep is the gift. The loan will be repaid regardless. The gift can only be given to yourself in the hours when the work pauses and the body asks for what it's always asking for. Give it those hours when you can. They are the only hours that belong entirely to you. The city sound has found its low frequency. The register that Bangkok makes after midnight when the day shifts are home and the night shifts are deep into their work and the city itself is not asleep but breathing slower. The sound of a place that is large enough to be continuous but human enough to have rhythms. The sound of the river if you're close enough. The sound of a fan in a room without air conditioning turning slowly in a corner. The sound of breathing, someone else's breathing, in the same room. The breathing of people who are where they need to be, doing what bodies do when the work is done and the tools are set down and the molecule is metabolized and the great ancient body-demanded rest begins its work. The neurons that were firing are quieting. The adenosine that was deferred is clearing. The cellular repair crews that run only in sleep are running. Everything that needs fixing is being fixed. Everything that needs resting is resting. You are warm enough, safe enough, far enough into the night that the morning is not yet a concern. The envelope for Chiang Mai is on the floor by the door. The quota for tomorrow has not yet happened. The motorcycle is outside. The bottle is empty. Everything else is later. This is now. Now is rest. Let it happen. Let it happen the way it happens. Not controlled, not managed, not optimized, not the result of any forebet intervention. Just the body's own old intelligence, running the program it has been running since before there were words for what the program was. Sleep, real sleep, yours. Good night.